Thank you to Northeast Metro 916. That's a district in the Twin Cities area. We have some people who are joining us from out of state. And so Northeast Metro is a school district, kind of like a cooperative. They support a variety of different students who have low incidence disabilities. They have generously sponsored the communication accessibility by providing CURT, real-time captioning, and then also the ASL interpreter services. Alrighty. Code link is in the chat. If you need to have captioning, you can grab that link. It opens up on a separate screen, or you can continue to watch captions directly in the Zoom meeting. So I apologize for the delay. We're on the road. We're going to keep going now. I just was introducing our team. We have Deanna Rothbauer. She's the person on the left here on both photos. She is the project co-director. She's been with the project for over 15 years. She's also a parent of a young adult who is deafblind. And so she offers an amazing perspective and experiences for our team and for parents still. My name is Ann.mayes, and I'm the education specialist with the Minnesota DeafBlind Project. I work a lot with I often work with school teams and provide support and resources. Sometimes we do in-services, but a lot of the times I'm behind the scenes and offering information for schools so that they feel like they have the tools that they need to teach a child who's deafblind. And then we also have Brandy Sebera. She is our family engagement coordinator. She is the person that's on the far right. And you can see from our second picture, we have a lot of fun as a team. We're a close team, like I mentioned before, so we have a lot of good, strong internal communication. And like I mentioned, if you just joined us, we often will, if you're not sure who to contact, one of us is contacted, we share the information to make sure you're connected to the right person. So let's go ahead and begin. First, I've mentioned before, rename your screen, microphones and cameras off. We are expecting over 130 people who registered. We don't know if that will be that number, but because this is a larger group, please keep your microphones and cameras off. Carolyn may ask for participants to turn on cameras from time to time for interaction, but probably because we have a late start, that probably will not happen because we want to make sure that we get through the information for you. And so you ask your questions in the chat. Deanna, myself, and Brandy will be monitoring the chat to make sure that Carolyn also has access to that. Okay, and let's continue. This is our welcome and introductions. We just finished that. And then Carolyn's going to start off with the impact on deafblindness. She'll do a quick introduction of herself as well. Then we'll have a quick break in the morning, a 1-hour lunch, and then another break in the afternoon. Carolyn is a valued member of our team. She's actually in Toronto, Canada, but she has been involved with the Minnesota DeafBlind Project for many years. She is one of our teachers or one of our presenters during the 6-weekend intervener training series that we offer, the foundational intervener training series that's in person here in Minnesota. So there are some of you who are actually going to be participating in that training starting in October. She herself has been an intervener, a consultant, a trainer, and a teacher in intervention, including the intervener program at George Brown College in Toronto, Canada. She continues to be, I've already mentioned that. She also received the Anne Sullivan Macy Medal in 2018 for her outstanding work. She's been a very huge, well-known person and a person who offers so much experience and expertise in the field of deafblindness. So we're really fortunate to have her presenting today. If you want to learn more about deafblindness, we will have some Open Hands, Open Access, which is a cohort series, which is asynchronous, it's online. Carolyn also moderates that, or she facilitates that, so she provides feedback and input. We will be sending out that flyer probably next week. So look for that. It goes out to the different listservs, and then the cohort begins, the different cohorts begin September 17th. Then I'm going to stop sharing here. We will talk about that workshop evaluation at the end after Carolyn's presentation. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Carolyn so that we can, like I said, get the show back on the road. So I'm going to spotlight you, Carolyn. And we're switching interpreters as well. So thank you again, Carolyn, for taking the time and sharing your expertise and knowledge on deafblindness. And take it away.
Hey, thanks very much, Ann. Welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We all, everyone in the field of deafblindness appreciates people who take the time out to learn about this fascinating field and wonderful group of individuals. So thank you again. Our goals for today are to increase your understanding of the impact of deafblindness on the students with whom you work. Increase your understanding of the learning style of these students, or the potential learning style, and increase your understanding of the philosophy of intervention and the role of the interveners. Okay, and basic showed you our schedule for today, so we'll just move on. Our format for the day we have a few polls that we would like you to participate in, and some opportunities for you to share your thoughts in the chat. I'll be presenting some information through the slides, and we've got a number of photos throughout the slides that we've added, and just so that you know, all of the photos are of students and individuals in Minnesota. So there's some really great photos, and I think this is a great example of a photo is worth 1,000 words. Because you're going to see some really interesting folks. We also have an interactive activity planned that we'll do this morning, and a couple of videos. So hopefully that will provide a variety of different ways that we're going to hopefully gather some information here. Okay, and I think what we'll do is we'll start first with our poll number 1. And this is basically so we can just get a sense of who's here in our group. Okay, and the question will be, which of the following best describes your role with a student with deafblindness? Okay. Okay, thanks so much for taking part in that. It's just nice to know who we have with us, and I'm sure there's a lot of expertise within that variety of people. Okay.
I just think that'd be so frustrating to like get what you're trying to say out, or
I'm gonna interact with my family and I can't see them and I can't hear them.
Like you couldn't play sports or hang out with your friends.
My life will change like 100%.
It's very complex, and every deafblind person, child is totally
I don't
different.
even see it.
But deafblindness is huge. It's huge.
Deafblindness is seeing and hearing in a different way.
There's so much inside that you may not know is there until you start building a bond of trust. You're going to learn so much about that child. Some of these kids and adults are the funniest people that I have ever met.
These students who I didn't know what to make of when I first met them, other than they seemed really interested and I wanted to get to know them. But as I begun to learn about calendar systems and communication systems, I realized that the learning potential, the ceiling for these students was way higher than I ever realized. Oh my gosh, this stuff works really well, and it's so much fun.
So the comments in this video from sighted hearing people are pretty consistent with what we typically hear in the field. Most people cannot relate to deafblindness, and most people or few people have any frame of reference for deafblindness outside of Helen Keller. And that's a big piece of why we're here today, to kind of learn more about it. Okay, posed with the
This is
same.
Deanna.
Oh, yes.
You need to share your screen again. We're not seeing your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Deanna. Okay, do you see it now? Okay, great. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is pose with the same question. Are there points that you might add? How do you think being deaf, hard of hearing, and blind or low vision would affect your life? And if you could just take a couple of minutes and put some of those points into the chat. Accessibility would be the biggest challenge. Okay, great comments, people. Interaction with peers and family might change. New environments, exploring new environments would be challenging. Okay. All right, lots of great comments there. Thanks for participating in that. Okay. All right, there's a lot of good news. And that's that, that sighted hearing people can learn to a degree, to think from the perspective of someone who has a significant combined loss of vision and hearing. Okay, it takes some training, it takes some experience, it takes kind of delving in, but we can learn about this. Okay, and we do have strategies and they do work. Okay, and people who are deafblind can and do have very rich, meaningful lives. And I think that seems to be new and great news to often people from outside of the field. And at one of the pictures here of a little boy who has significant vision and hearing loss, holding a little chick, and he looks quite happy and proud of himself there. Okay, let's look first at what is the definition of deafblindness. And as Anne alluded to, we refer to deafblindness, but in the majority of cases, it is a significant loss of both vision and hearing. Okay, and so the definition is individuals with auditory and visual impairments, the combination of which create such severe communication and other developmental and learning needs that they cannot be appropriately educated without special education and related services beyond those that would be provided solely for children with hearing impairments, visual impairments, or severe disabilities. And that's the US definition from the Individuals with Disabilities Act. Okay, that definition indicates that deafblindness is a significant combined loss of both vision and hearing, which, if we kind of reframe that, does indicate that individuals could be identified as deafblind, but could in fact have some vision and or hearing. Okay, deafblindness challenges an individual's opportunity to access visual and auditory information. And that was mentioned in a few of the different points that were just put in the chat. Deafblindness significantly impacts both receptive and expressive communication. So it impacts how we receive communication, and it impacts how, in fact, someone with deafblindness would communicate with others. Okay, both receptive and expressive, and it impacts the development of those forms of communication and the use of those forms of communication. Okay, individuals with deafblindness require related services. Okay, and so that could be an intervener, or it could be a deafblind specialist. Okay, deafblindness is a distinct and different. It's distinct and different from deaf, hard of hearing, or blind and low vision. Okay, and I think that is that's an important point in terms of training, because we see deafblindness as a distinct disability kind of unto itself. We provide training specific to deafblindness. Okay, I believe, based on our first poll, that there are probably a number of individuals on our session today who have experience in either the field of deaf and hard of hearing or of blind and low vision. Okay, and so they will certainly have some experience, knowledge, skills that will certainly be very helpful in the field of deafblindness, but they also will have aspects of the field and forms of communication that they may not be familiar with from the field that they're in. Okay, just so that we're all on the same page with a few terms that you may see or read in some of the literature. I just wanted to make sure people were aware, firstly, of the terms congenital deafblindness and acquired deafblindness. Okay, so congenital deafblindness means that the deafblindness was present at birth. And acquired deafblindness means that the deafblindness occurred after birth. And typically what we would say is we kind of loosely have these time frames on this, but typically congenital we think of as individuals who became deafblind prior to the development of language, and acquired deafblindness after that, the acquisition of language. Okay, so kind of, we sometimes use that, if we had to put a timeline on it, we sometimes use that 18-month time span. Okay, so we have a little girl here, a picture of a little girl who's maybe, a year or two old, representing somebody who might be congenitally deafblind. And then we have a picture here with someone, an older gentleman, with potentially acquired deafblindness and well-developed language. Okay, three other terms that are kind of important in understanding this field is, the first one is emergent communicator. Those are individuals whose communication skills are sort of in the earlier stages of development, and they may be, you may be working with students who are emergent communicators, who have various forms of vocabulary, maybe using less abstract forms of communication. They may be using three-dimensional objects or parts of objects, or they may be using a variety of different forms of pictures if they have some vision. And also there may be others in the group who are working with proficient communicators, those who have who have developed language and maybe who are using ASL as a form of communication, or potentially print or Braille, but are proficient in the forms of communication that they use. And the other term here is residual senses. And you'll often see this either referred to or in the literature, basically referring to the senses that remain. whether in their entirety or partially. And if we're talking about deafblindness, we're talking if they have residual vision or residual hearing, then they can make use of maybe even in specific environments, maybe with specific lighting or various forms of, glasses, those kinds of things where, but they do have some form of vision and or hearing. Okay. Another thing that is important to kind of think about when you're working with students who are deafblind is the time of onset of that deafblindness. Okay, and time of onset means basically when did someone become deafblind? And there are 4 kind of broad options, and within each one of these 4 options, there obviously is also a spectrum. Okay, so let's just look at what those 4 options are. Okay, first of all, okay, so the first one is congenital deafness and acquired blindness. So this is going to be somebody who was born deaf or hard of hearing and acquired their blindness or low vision later. And that, thinking about this, that there's a huge spectrum here, really. That later could refer to a few years later. It could be somebody who lost their vision as a result of an accident at 20. It could be somebody, later into their 50s or 60s, or as an elderly person. So that spectrum is pretty huge. The second one is kind of the opposite. Somebody who is congenitally blind, so was born blind, and acquired their deafness or hard of hearing later in life. Okay, and in the same sense, it could be early in their life, or it could be much later. Okay, some of you in the group may have a parent or a grandparent who maybe fits into any one of these first three categories. The third one is acquired deafness and acquired blindness. So this is somebody who was born sighted and hearing, and as a result of any number of reasons, could have lost their hearing or become deaf or hard of hearing or blind or low vision. And that could be, I know individuals myself that I've worked with who lost both of them at the same time. Others may have been one followed later by the other. Okay, and then the last one here, the fourth option, is somebody who was born congenitally deaf or hard of hearing and congenitally blind or low vision. Okay, and I think the important thing here is to think about, based on somebody's time of onset of deafblindness, it certainly impacts potentially how they communicate. What was their first language? Was it English? Was it ASL? Was it concrete objects? Okay, it also impacts changes that they may have to deal with. Particularly those first 3. All of those involve or potentially involve some type of significant change in one's life or the way they communicate or the way they access information. Okay, we're going to look now at a poll here, a second poll. Okay, and this poll has 2 questions. and it's about the time of onset. The first question is, which of the following best describes the time of onset of Helen Keller's deafblindness? If in fact you are familiar with Helen Keller. And which of the following best describes the time of onset of a student you know with deafblindness? Okay, I think we can end the poll.
Carolyn, did you see there's a comment in the chat for you from Rocky?
Oh, no, I didn't. Let me just check.
Rocky Hart says, I am deafblind and I would fit the congenitally blind, acquired deaf hard of hearing category.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rocky.
Let me know when you want me to stop sharing the poll results.
Okay, I think we can stop the poll, stop sharing. Interestingly enough, just so you know, Helen Keller became was born sighted and hearing and became deafblind at they say about 18 months as a result of meningitis. Okay, so she certainly had access to knowing that people communicate. And you think about an 18-month-old, we may have people in a group who have 18-month-olds at home, and recognize how much access to information one has in just 18 months of the first 18 months of life. Okay, so she's kind of on that line, but I think it's always interesting. I think people know that she became deafblind very young, so the assumption is often that she was congenitally deafblind. And it looks like we have a good representation in terms of people working with students who are deafblind of all four categories, which is terrific. The obviously the largest here being in this group, people working with people who are congenitally deaf and congenitally blind. Okay, thanks so much for sharing that. Okay, again, it's always interesting to know where, in fact, or who people are working with. Okay, so that I like to share that because I think it really does make a difference in terms of the types of information that people may have had access to. Or in terms of visual information for some, auditory information for others, conceptual information, and like I say, just knowing that human beings interact and communicate with one another is a huge conceptual point for many individuals, and something that in many cases we have to teach some people that from the very beginning. So that's a time-consuming conceptual lesson for many. Okay. All right. The next thing that I'd like to talk a little bit about, and I will probably talk a little bit about this until we have our break. Okay, these are 4 primary areas that are impacted by deafblindness. Clearly, there are, hundreds, thousands maybe, areas that are impacted by deafblindness, but these are pretty 4 broad areas, but are really important. And I always think that if I had just, we have a little bit longer today, but there's so much to know, that if for some reason you had just a half an hour to talk to people about deafblindness and about the impact, that sharing this portion here of these 4 points, you can actually go into work on Monday morning and make a difference. If you're working with somebody who's deafblind, if you have some understanding of how these 4 areas are in fact impacted. Okay, so and in some cases you can make a significant difference. Okay, so I'd like you, as I go through this, if you have had opportunity to interact with people who are deafblind in the past, then please kind of think about applying this information to them, so that it helps you to kind of have examples of what these things might look like in the classroom. The first one is anticipation. And I also think if you can think about how this would impact yourself, if you were deafblind. Anticipation. We use particularly our vision and our hearing to anticipate all kinds of things, to anticipate people approaching us. We might see somebody approaching us. We might hear somebody approaching us. And that provides us with some time. Sometimes it might be a very short period of time, but at least it's an opportunity to kind of ready ourselves for what's about to happen. And when you cannot gather the information that allows you to anticipate what's going to happen, it's cause for anxiety. That unknown. It means that you're constantly living in the now. And that can be challenging. You know, part of the reason why we start most sessions like this with a little bit of an agenda, or any meeting that you may attend, typically is prefaced with an agenda, either at the beginning of the meeting, and many times you might have the agenda days in advance, so that you have time to anticipate what the meeting's going to be about. You kind of have to have time to prepare and to ready yourself. And I think we're kind of hardwired to need that information. And when we don't have it, like I said, it can be very anxiety driving. So on Monday morning, if there is anything that you can do to help the student that you're working with who's deafblind anticipate what is about to happen, you'll do both them and yourself a big favor. I've often seen some students with some significant, some challenging behavior, where it became obvious that a lot of that challenge or a lot of that behavior came from them not knowing what was about to happen. And some of that may be not knowing that something is about to end. We also have a significant need to know when are things going to be over. And the more we're enjoying it, the more likely we need to know when it's going to be over. So that anticipation is a huge factor and can be applied across the board, no matter the age of the individual, no matter what kinds of conceptual understanding they have, no matter how much vision and hearing they have. We need to think about how we can let them know what is about to happen in a form that makes sense to them. Okay, the next one is motivation. And I think you shouldn't underestimate how much of what we see and we hear provides us with motivation. Even just seeing other people are having a good time is typically the motivation that might encourage somebody to want to interact as well. Seeing that other people, got on a swing, appeared to be laughing and smiling and enjoying it, and appeared to be safe, or seeing that somebody was there to help them is all motivating for a sighted child watching somebody on a swing and it becoming a factor as to whether or not they too want to get on that swing. So the idea that information that cannot be accessed by a student that might be motivating lends itself sometimes to us thinking that this is a population of individuals who don't want to participate, who don't want to take part, who don't want to reach out. You know, I've only ever, or I have even heard people sometimes refer to students as being lazy. You know, that's problematic for me to hear that, because it worries me that somebody hasn't thought about the impact of deafblindness and the impact that it has on their level of motivation. A level of motivation to want to participate. And later this afternoon, when we talk about the role of the intervener, we're going to see that we're going to see this repeated. We're going to see that, or hopefully you're going to see that if this is the area of impact, then this also becomes part of the role of the intervener, to know what to put into place that might help to motivate an individual, or might help to give them the information that they can't access on their own so that they are motivated. Okay, the third one is communication. And communication, I think this one becomes, I think this is a little more obvious for people to see or to understand, that most of the forms of communication that the typical sighted hearing population uses involves either vision and or hearing. Okay, and that when both of those areas are impacted, as they are in deafblindness, then that means that so are the forms of communication that these individuals might develop or learn to use. So communication is a huge piece, and the sooner that we can put strategies in place to let somebody know that they can be understood and that you can make yourself understood by them, then the better things are going to be in terms of developing effective communication that works for both the individual who's deafblind and the interveners, family members, classroom teachers, therapists, anybody who's interacting with somebody who's deafblind. But it's an area that is most definitely impacted by the combined loss of vision and hearing. And I think we can all kind of anticipate what happens. You know, what would happen? What happens when you can't make yourself understood? You know, I sometimes think, well, let's use as an example for those of us here, that what happens if when you're, you know, if you've traveled to a country where you don't speak the language, or if you've come to a country where you don't speak the language, you know, and how frustrating that is or can be to not be able to make yourself understood, or to not understand what's going on in the environment you're in. Okay, and so yeah, I think I like to give a lot of examples or encouragement to people in these types of presentations to think about how this applies to you. Because if you can do that, then I think you're going to have an easier time applying the information, and having empathy for the position that people who are deafblind are in. Okay, the last one here is confirmation. And this to me is kind of this is kind of the forgotten one. I think that the importance of it underestimated. The idea that that we receive a lot of confirmation that we probably don't think about. I don't think it's something that we typically think about outside of the field of deafblindness. Um, the idea that I'll give you a great example because um, and that's become very prevalent since COVID, this whole idea of working through Zoom online, where um, for just as an example for me, who's very accustomed to teaching in a college classroom and seeing the looks on people's faces and knowing when they're having a light bulb moment with something that I might be explaining, or when they look completely confused, or when in a presentation people are looking like they're falling asleep. um, that kind of confirmation or feedback is really important, and it's something that when I can't see your faces or your facial expressions, so I get no confirmation or feedback kind of during the presentation. So that is when I think of that, to me that's challenging. And so if that was kind of if that was how things were all the time, it would be really difficult. When you don't get feedback, you don't know what to change or what to keep. And so thinking about that is just one very small example. But somebody who's deafblind, how do they get feedback on knowing whether or not what they're doing is appropriate, and to keep doing more of that? Especially if you're working with a trained team, then hopefully you're putting strategies into practice and you're creating ways of letting somebody know that they're doing a good job, kind of, and you're creating ways that are meaningful to the individual. Sometimes we know that if somebody gives you a pat on the back, that that typically, depending on what the pat on the back feels like, it's kind of confirming. It's kind of like it could be perceived as being very caring. But when you can't anticipate a pat on the back coming, that might not be perceived in the same way if you're deafblind. So the team needs to think about ways that we can provide some confirmation. And the other thing to think about here in terms of confirmation or feedback is just there's the confirmation of feedback that comes from other people, but there's also confirmation of feedback that just comes from the environment and the situation. For example, knowing that something is hot. If you get feedback, you get information from the steam rising in your coffee cup. You can look into your coffee cup and see how much you have left. That's feedback. That's confirmation. It may seem may seem like something very small to you and I, who might do that numerous times in a day and not really even think about it. But how do students who are deafblind, how do they get confirmation that makes sense to them from their environment? And what's the impact of not getting that confirmation or that feedback and not knowing how are you doing? It's kind of like if you picture yourself, writing a test or writing an exam, and you never ever find out how you did. Or if it's a multiple choice and you just are told, oh, you had 4 wrong. Don't you always wonder, which 4 was it? Which 4 did I get wrong? That's feedback. That's confirmation. And again, it's kind of a something we don't really think about very often. So these 4 areas, like I say, when you go back to work, if you pick up nothing else from today, but you think about these 4 areas, and your team thinks about how you can make a difference for somebody who's deafblind in these 4 areas, you're you're off to a good start in terms of having a positive impact. Okay, I'm just going to do another slide or 2 here, and then we'll take our first break. Okay, just so that you can anticipate that. Oh, okay. The next thing we're going to look at after the break, we're going to do an activity when we come back, but that activity is kind of prefacing the idea of their learning style. You know, how individuals learn best. And obviously, this is going to be somewhat generic to students who are deafblind. But there are some things that we've kind of discovered in the last 40 years that work in terms of individuals who are deafblind and the conditions that are most conducive to acquiring and understanding information. Because deafblindness is in fact an access to information disability. That's not to say that many of the students that you may be working with have additional disabilities in addition to their deafblindness. Okay, and that might necessitate additional learning strategies. But for those who are deafblind or the deafblind part of their access needs, there certainly are some conditions that we can create and an environment that we can create that should help them to acquire information and then to understand it. Okay. We'll start back and we're going to start with an activity here. Okay, I'm going to do a little going back and forth on the screen here. So you just have to bear with me a little bit here. Hopefully we can do this. Okay, what we're going to do is an activity. I'm going to use, I'm calling it's an apple activity. I'm going to use an apple as a sort of a frame of reference here. And but the key points of this activity, you know, spread far beyond just apples. So we're just kind of using the apple as our sort of tool of the day. And at the end, hopefully there are a number of points, but there are 2 major or key, what I think of as key points that that I hope come across. And so as we're going through this, you can just think if you have a light bulb moment about what might be a couple of key points behind us doing this activity today. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to think about what the characteristics of an apple are. And if you can just kind of live vicariously through my experience, and let's pretend that we don't know anything about apples before. We've had no exposure to an apple or to anything about an apple. And so we have our first experience with an apple. It's quite good. So what I want you to do is kind of living vicariously through my biting of this apple. What kinds of information could I access that would provide me with some characteristics of this apple? Okay, and what I'm going to do here is, 1 second. I need to work on a slide here. Okay, so just gonna move that out of the way. And I'm actually gonna type on here the characteristics that you are going to, can you put them into the chat? And I'm gonna ask Deanna or Ann to just let me know. Oh, okay, wait, I can see them. Okay, so we have, okay, we have that there's a smell or a fragrance. Actually, Deanna or Ann or Brandy, could you just read them out while I'm typing? I can't actually see them.
This is Deanna. So far we have taste, smell, texture,
Okay,
and then someone clarified external and internal texture,
Right.
shape, smooth outside, round shape, can bite or slice it, smell, tart taste, juicy, tart, crisp, crunchy, sweet.
Oops. Okay.
The sound of crunch of biting. Laura shared that she salivated after watching you take that bite. The sounds helped too.
It was quite delicious too, Laura, I have to say. Okay, I'm just thinking there was a
Size.
oh, the size. Okay, we have a kind of a thought on what is the typical size. Oh, and the idea that it was round.
Yep. Weight.
I'm going to call that 3-dimensional.
And then someone
Right.
said again, shape, color.
Certain weight. There's a certain, yes, there's color. Okay, in this case, it's primarily red. Okay. Oh, it has a little bit of a stem, just so I can tell you that. Let me just see. Is there? Oh, I think somebody might have mentioned inside and out there. It has a skin, and we know that because we can kind of see the inside of it. Okay.
Someone said grown on a tree. And then also if there are any imperfections like bruising, etc.
Right. Okay. Yes. And this one does have a little bit of a bruise or a little indentation on the side. I must have dropped it. Is that how you spell bruise?
BRUISE.
Yes. Okay.
And then Vicky said after the shape after you eat it, and then can you eat it all? You know, like the core
oh,
that would be remaining. Mary Beth said a variety of uses: eating, baking, apple printing, etc.
Right. Right. And I'm so glad that somebody mentioned some of those things in addition to are all things that I would have to have some exposure or some experience with to gather that information.
Phrasing. As an adult, I still play the piano and play her music and sing along.
This is Deanna. Please remember to mute your audio. We're hearing some background noise.
Okay, I'm going to add one more here. Oops, we also can see it's white inside. Okay, so that's great. We got a nice little list here of most of the characteristics that of this particular apple.
And
okay.
Someone else said seeds, Carolyn. That was the last.
Oh, okay, that's a good one too. Let's see, after a few more bites, I would get to the seed. Okay, all right, so that's great. Now, okay, so that's kind of just part one. We got a few parts to this activity. Okay, so the next thing I want to do here is to, if we were all in a room, if you can just imagine that I threw this apple at you, okay? And you caught it. Can you hear that? Okay. You caught this apple, and I can tell you this apple is not real. It looks good, but it's not a real apple. Okay, it might be one that, you know, I remember there was a time when people would have little displays, decorative displays of fake fruit. Okay, so that's what this one is. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is pretend that this apple here is your only frame of reference, that this apple, the one I took the bite out of, that you have never experienced this one. Okay, let's take that off the page right now. And this is your only frame of reference for an apple. Okay, we're going to go back to our little list here, and I'm going to go through them all, and we're going to take off the ones that where the information is either no longer available or is no longer accurate. Okay, so right now we have 3, 6, we have 16 kind of words or short phrases describing the apple that I took the bite out of. Okay, and so we're going to go back and look at these, and I'm going to take off the ones that are no longer applicable. Okay, so smell.
Carolyn,
I'm going to take off the ones that no longer apply. Okay, so smell, the fragrance, it's a little plasticky. Certainly not like the other one. Okay, in terms of crunchy, kind of would be a whole new definition of crunchy. Okay, so this is no longer applicable. Okay, it is not sweet. Okay, the texture, I can't get to the inside. So the texture of the inside is no longer, that information is no longer available to me. It is approximately the same size. It is round and it's 3-dimensional. So this is fairly accurate. Okay, it's smooth. The one thing is, if you were to catch this, you would realize that it's much lighter than the actual apple. So the information, it has a weight, but it's not accurate. If you thought that this was the weight of an apple, you would be underestimating the weight of an actual apple. Okay, so the information is not accurate. Okay, the color is still red. Okay, it's not tart or sweet. It does have a little stem. With the skin, the only reason that we know that this apple has skin is because we can see the white inside. So we don't really know whether that this is a skin or that this goes all the way through. So the information really is not accessible to us. Okay. It does have a little mark on it, but it's not a bruise. It's not accurate. Okay. The core has to go. Okay, because we can't access that. We can't access the white to see that it's white inside, and we can't access to see that it has seeds in it. Okay, so here's the information that we're left with. Okay, all right, I'd like to now, I'm gonna try to go back to, let's go back to here. Okay, you can still see that? Okay, yes. What we're going to look at now is, on the screen, is a picture of an apple, a red apple. Okay, an apple that looks actually quite similar to this one. Okay. All right, if I, Hoping this works. Okay, if we go back here, can you see the words now?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. Okay, so basically that if we let's forget now the real apple, let's forget the three-dimensional fake apple. Let's think only if your frame of reference for an apple was a picture of an apple, that one I showed on the screen, or any other picture of an apple. We have to look at what characteristics now would we not have access to. Okay, we most definitely would not know that an apple was round or three-dimensional. Okay, we could still see that it was red. We might even be able to see that it still has a stem. We might even say, I guess, that the picture was smooth. We'll leave that there just for now. And I suppose we'd have an approximate size, dimensions, but not three-dimensional. So for the purposes of this activity, we'll leave those where they are. Okay, and we will go back. Okay, now we have a black and white picture on the screen of an apple. Okay, if we go back, we have to at least take off our color red. We no longer have access to that information. Okay, we'll leave the rest there for the purposes of this. And let's go back and let's look at a few options here. If the sign for apple was your only frame of reference, okay, you had not seen any pictures, you had not experienced a real apple or a three-dimensional fake apple, okay, your only frame of reference was, for example, and we'll go through a few here, the sign for apple, the printed word apple, A-P-P-L-E, the Braille word for apple, in this case, just the visual dots, but not the tactile, or the spoken word apple. Okay, if we go back to our characteristics based on the sign for apple, the spoken word, the picture, or not the picture, but the spelling, the printed word, the Braille word, okay? Oops. Oh, goodness. Okay, we have three characteristics left here. We have to take out all three of those characteristics: size, the idea that it's smooth, the idea of a stem, they all have to go. So left on our list of characteristics is basically none. And what we learn from that is that we have a graduating list of information down to where a number of those options provide us with no information about the characteristics of this apple. Okay. All right, so first question here, and you can just put your answers in the chat. What are all of these apples in comparison to this real apple? What were each of the subsequent examples that I gave you in comparison to those?
This is Deanna. I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat, Carolyn. People said a replica with varying degrees of realism. Elizabeth said representation. The other Elizabeth said models. Abstract representation, model. Representations, and looks like model. Those are kind of our
the themes. Okay, that's great.
Yep. Natalie said an example of.
Okay, terrific.
And then Laura said a title or name of, you know, if it was the printed word.
Right.
Or the Braille word.
Okay. All right. A number of you have maybe not what they are representations. Okay. And certainly other terms could be used. So, but what they all are representations of an apple. Okay. And what's the definition of a representation? Okay. It's a creation that is a visual, auditory, tactile, or tangible rendering of someone or something. And in this case, that something is an apple. Okay, and some of the renderings, we had a visual rendering, we had an auditory rendering, the spoken word, we had I had at least the tactile in terms of the fake apple, and this also being somewhat tangible, the fake one also. Okay, so in terms of a key point, okay, that impacts the way in which that hopefully this information might impact what you do or how you interact with students who are deafblind. Okay, here's the first key point, that once we kind of get our head around that the greatest amount of accurate information comes from experiencing the real. Okay, so touching it, in this case, tasting it, smelling it, you know, manipulating it in your hands. Okay, that's how we get the most accurate information. Okay, and then we kind of can work the other way. Okay, the second point is that whenever possible, experiencing the real is where we want to start. And then we want to move towards the more abstract. Okay, does that make sense to people? Especially when we're thinking about individuals who are deafblind, and it may make sense, although my experience has also been that it's somewhat challenging to always implement that. There are lots of things that are going on that we might be discussing, talking about, trying to create communication around in a classroom setting, whereby the real or the actual cannot necessarily be accessed. You know, an apple is an easy one. We can bring in an apple and we can experience that. Okay, and then we can move to the more abstract. But even if visiting an apple farm was something, and there's a picture on this slide of a little girl who is clearly sitting in front of an apple tree with a basket of apples, and she's holding an apple. So she's out at least one apple tree, maybe an apple farm. But interestingly, I'm not sure about what happens in Minnesota, but here in our educational system, where apples was at some point on the fall curriculum of an elementary classroom, the trip to the apple farm is typically, here it often was at the end of the apple unit. It was like a summary point. You know, we'd talk about apples, we'd experience maybe apples in the classroom, and then going to actually experience where they come from, or from a tree, is at the end of the unit. Okay, which, you know, I mean, we can work with a student who's deafblind, but it's maybe not ideal. So it's not always possible, but whenever it's possible, it's an important fact to keep in mind. And it's also even just an important fact to keep in mind that this, or a picture, is not an apple. Sometimes part of the issue here is we don't call things what they are. The sign for apple is not an apple. You know, the printed word apple is the word apple. Sometimes we just take that for granted, that somebody is going to know that. And sometimes in deafblindness, we get, if we can get some feedback sometimes from our students, we realize how the product of what they understand is the product of how the information was provided to them. Okay, so often what they understand, we've helped to create that, accurate or not. And we need to think about that. Okay, and we really need to think about this in terms of the learning style. And I think across this field, a big piece of what you're going to hear sort of now and going forward is that experience is everything. It's a way in which somebody can access accurate information. Okay, and particularly in the case of some individuals who don't have a lot of language, who maybe have a little vocabulary, they're not going to necessarily be able to access information that they can't experience. Okay, let's move on there. Okay, so let's start talking about the learning style of individuals who are deafblind. And please think about the students that you know as we kind of go through these and see how they can apply. They're not in any particular order of importance. Although if somebody did suggest that I should put these in order of importance, I probably would put this first one as number one. And so it's interesting that this one just kind of, I think when I was putting together this list, came to me first. You know, I think that one of the most important things is that those who are interacting with them believe and expect that they will learn. That is just so important. Whoops. It's just so important that we believe in them, because this is a population that doesn't necessarily, left to their own devices, they not all appear like they're kind of in learning mode. So we need those of us who are working directly with them, we need to really believe that they can learn. We don't have to believe that they're going to Harvard, but we need to believe that given information in a way that they can access it, that they will learn. And we need to expect that, because that if this doesn't happen, it impacts the way those interacting with them it impacts the work they're doing and the way they do it. You know, I think when I, you know, used to tell my college students that if I didn't believe that they couldn't all become great interveners, you know, with the proper training and experience and feedback, if I didn't think that they could all become a great intervener, it would impact the way I taught. Okay, and I think we really need to think about that. That if we don't believe that, how can we expect that the student is going to believe in themselves and that other people are going to believe in them too? So that's kind of number one. Okay. They learn best when they're encouraged to explore their environment and become familiar with it, become familiar with the people in their environment. Okay. And if they can explore and do some of that independent, and gather information independently, it's a great thing. And what their environment looks like, it might be their wheelchair tray, or it might be the entire high school. Okay, it might be the top of their desk, or their desk, or their locker. But they need to be encouraged to explore that and to become familiar with it, because familiarity for this population doesn't always come easy. You know, when we see things time after time after time after time, we become very familiar with it, and we become, you know, that's very anxiety reducing to be familiar. But when you can't access the information, it takes a lot longer to become familiar with things. I like to think of it, think about you walk into a brand new restaurant for lunch one day. The amount of information you get in a couple of visits, you probably feel fairly familiar with it. So you're comfortable there. You think about how many times somebody who's deafblind has to have access to information so that they can become familiar with it.
Carolyn, this is Deanna. I wanted to just read Rocky, who's joining us today, who is a deafblind young adult. He has a comment in the chat that I wanted to read out loud.
Sure.
He says, unapologetically believing in deafblind people, along with expecting personal responsibility, is the key to their success. Thank you for prioritizing this, as it needs to be emphasized more. And Rocky, we thank you so much for your perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rocky. And it's very heartwarming for me to know that I've always believed that this is kind of number one. So it's great that you provide me that kind of feedback. I love that. Okay, so the last one here, when they're provided with a finished product or a sample that supports the formal language. Okay, so if you think about, again, I'll go to kind of us as a larger group. I think about if I often use the example of a recipe book. You know, if you've got two different recipe books, they both have exactly the same recipes in it, but one has pictures of what the final product is supposed to look like. That's the one I'm buying, because that's the one that gives me additional information. Okay, that's the one that gives me some feedback. I'm going to be able to, when my cake is done and I can look at the picture and go, hey, mine looks pretty good in comparison to the beautiful one in the picture, then I'm feeling pretty good about the cake I just made. Okay, or if it's something where I'm like, I'm a little unsure about what should it look like. Right from the beginning, the picture, the finished product might even motivate me to make something that when I read the list of the ingredients, I thought, no, I don't know if that sounds so good. But when I saw the picture, I thought, well, it looks really good. So the idea that you might provide them with a finished product, or a sample, especially if it's the first number of times they've done it, once they have done something and they have an expectation of how that should turn out, I'm thinking like, maybe an art project, or if they're involved in cooking anything or putting their lunch together. Once they've done it a number of times, they then maybe have the information of what the end product is like. Okay, but up until that point, they might need a finished product to motivate somebody to complete or just to give additional information. Okay, they have a sense of what that's going to look like. It also for those students who maybe don't have a lot of formal language, okay, that whereby you can't explain what the end product's going to be, it gives them some information upon which they can anticipate. Okay, we'll go back to that, anticipate. Okay, and here on the screen now is the words encourage the safe exploration of their environment, and a picture of a young boy who's deafblind exploring a piece of equipment that might be in a park. Okay, it's on a little bridge, and is feeling the handrail there. So exploring that kind of equipment or anything in the environment, and thinking of that as a task that you might want to do first. A lot of encouraging a student who's deafblind to participate is truly all in the presentation, and you can turn somebody off in a kind of one wrong move often, or you can make things slow things down, slow the pace down, let somebody feel comfortable before you suddenly are having them go up the stairs and down a slide. Maybe it would be in your best interest often, if it was the first time you were introducing them to that you take some time, as much time as it takes for them to feel comfortable with that, maybe feeling somebody else go down the slide, long before you ever suddenly are encouraging them to climb the stairs and go down. At least for those first few times. Now, you might have a student who's been on a slide a million times, feels the stairs, recognizes it, and will just climb right up. But you may have others who have not had that kind of exposure, have not had those kinds of experience, and they need to do things at a much slower pace. And with information that really is visual information that anybody else would, with vision, would have received numerous times, that they walked by that playground, they've driven by that playground. They've had so much more visual and auditory exposure prior to being asked to climb that ladder. Okay, we'll continue with a few more points here. When they're physically and emotionally comfortable. This I think is also huge, in that some of that presentation can kind of turn that emotional comfort upside down. And when somebody is feeling really anxious about what they sense somebody's going to ask them to do or participate in, now they're not emotionally comfortable. And it may take all the energy they have to just regulate themselves when they're not emotionally comfortable. And so we need to think about that. And the other thing is the physical. For those of you who have been through a deafblind simulation, and if you haven't, I would certainly encourage you to do so. One of the things that a lot of the feedback that we get about that people experiencing a simulation like that is that without any visual or auditory distraction, a lot of these students, they have a lot more time to concentrate more on their physical being. You know, they don't have a lot of if they're not getting stimulation and whatnot from the external, then you can really sense things internally. So, you know, if you or I get a paper cut, we might give it, you know, 10 seconds of a, oh, I got a paper cut, and oh, that hurts. And then we're on to some whatever we're doing, or we're distracted by something else, visual or auditory. But you know, if you don't have those distractions, you can be consumed by that paper cut and that physical discomfort. And so when you think about how much, particularly those of you who might be working with students with additional physical disabilities, who might have, who might be constipated, who might have their AFOs on a little snug, who, you know, any number of physical things going on, okay, that those, when those things kind of consume their thoughts, it's very hard to introduce new information. They're not in a ready state to learn new things because they're trying to regulate their physical and emotional being. So focusing on that, focusing on their physical and emotional comfort first is a really important strategy. Okay, and is certainly is underlying whether they're not in a state to be able to learn. Okay, when the pace of the activity is appropriate to their physical, emotional, communication, and conceptual needs. Okay, that's kind of a big mouthful, and there's a lot encompassed in that one point there. But the bottom line here is that the pace of things. When you have to, it's not that people who are deafblind can't access information, but in some cases, it just takes a little bit longer. And so especially in 2024, when we are just so accustomed to things happening so instantaneously, and we want things to move quick, we really need to think about the pace of things, the pace that you're physically moving through space with them. You know, if they're having to almost run to keep up physically, then all their focus is probably on that. You know, so if the communication is being presented so quickly that, you know, and this might be in the form of, for example, sign language. You know, if it's being presented visually or tactually, you know, it takes time to kind of to develop understanding about what that communication and to interpret that. So you really want to think long and hard about the speed or the pace with which you introduce things in so many of those ways. Okay, they learn best when they have a bond or a relationship that's built on trust with those people who are interacting with them. And this is reiterated time after time after time when people are involved in simulations and are under a deafblind simulation, that they almost always will comment on how vulnerable they felt and how much they either felt they had to or they struggled with putting so much trust in another person. When they know who their partner was and they trust them, they're much more, they're much calmer when they take off the simulation. Because they knew that they knew the person. If in fact you're doing you're under a simulation and you don't know who that other person is, you know, and you only are under a simulation for maybe 20 minutes, it's very anxiety driving for many people. And so we're going to come back to this afternoon, but that opportunity to develop a relationship with the people that are interacting with you has a huge impact on someone's comfort level and therefore their state of being able to access new information. Okay, when they have models who provide real life examples, okay, this is a little like having a sample, but in this case, having a real life live person who can act as a model for them. I think when we think about how much we learn from just watching other people, you know, and watching what they're doing, especially if we're a little unfamiliar on what to do. Okay, I mean, I find myself doing that. If I'm somewhere and I'm asked to do something and I'm thinking, oh, I'm not sure about how to do this, I look at what are other people doing. You know, we see this all the time. If you're doing a simulation, you see that the interveners are looking at what are other people in the room doing, how are they interacting with people, and it gives them some ideas or some confidence to interact with whomever they're interacting with. So the idea of having real models, and often that real live model is the intervener. And it's also another way of providing information. I think even, you know, you think about preschoolers, the preschooler isn't sure how to put on their coat. They just look at what other kids are doing. Okay, how does somebody who's deafblind learn to independently put on their coat? If they don't have any vision, they need somebody who's going to provide them with a tactual model of how to do that. Okay, and here on the screen is the words models that provide real life examples, and a photo of an intervener and a student who's deafblind at a fountain, and it's basically a two-person fountain, and so you can see this is a perfect example of how this intervener could provide a model, a visual, in this case, a visual model. This student has some vision on what to do. It's another way of providing information. And we need to recognize how little access individuals who are deafblind have to outside visual models. Okay. Couple more points here. When they're provided with opportunities to have control over their environment. You know, we all want to have some control. And, you know, depending on the student and their level of understanding, we need a team that's going to look at what are appropriate ways that this student can have control. You know, can they decide, you know, they can't necessarily decide whether or not they come to school, but maybe they could decide whether or not they do this activity or this activity, or they could decide how they're going to do the activity. Okay, so as interveners or as team members, we have to always be looking for ways in which we can provide them with appropriate opportunities to have some control. Okay, and I think there's a direct relationship with being able to have some control and understanding that you have some control in the early years with the taking of initiative in the latter, you know, going forward. A lot of people will tell me, oh, he doesn't really initiate much, you know, and you know, you have to ask yourself, does he know he can, and was he given opportunities to take some control in the past? So people don't just have no control for 10 years and suddenly wake up one morning and decide, I'm going to take control today. I'm going to initiate things. And we need to recognize that. So early opportunities to provide them with some control over their environment are more likely to lead to someone who will initiate going forward. Okay, when they're provided with sufficient amount of repetition and routine that enables them to anticipate. You know, we talk an awful lot about repetition in this field and about the development of a routine. And the purpose, particularly of routine, is that it allows people to anticipate what's going to happen next. Okay, they both, routine in particular, has huge value. And typically I like to explain this in the sense that the less formalized communication that a student has, the more important the routine becomes. Because in actual fact, the routine is a way of communicating to somebody what is going to happen next. And we already know the importance of being able to anticipate. Where routine sometimes can kind of go over the edge in the other direction is when somebody is very familiar with the routine and suddenly, not suddenly, but over time, comes to understand that the way this has been done is the way that it always will be done. Because we all know that the best of routines and our best laid plans to create a routine at some point in time are not going to work. And so the routine, I think of it as almost a temporary form of communication for many who will develop more communication and whereby you can explain change. Okay, so again, what I see more often than not is everybody talking about routine, 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 but not necessarily always talking about the fact that you have to be a little bit careful how much of a routine you create without teaching somebody some new aspects to that routine. That there is, you know what, there's more than one way to get to the cafeteria. Right? Because at some point in time, when you have to go a different way, it's like us driving, learning more than one route to somewhere eventually is going to be helpful. Okay. Initially, we maybe just want to learn one way to get somewhere, but eventually, at some point in time, when that highway is closed, we need to know that there are other ways to get somewhere. Okay. And otherwise, it creates problems. Okay, when they understand the consistent expectations, you know, this is where the development of a team with really good communication comes in, especially if an individual, a student has a number of different people interacting with them. Okay, who all have kind of their own version on what the expectations are. You know, we've had people go through simulations in a training session who at the end didn't even know that the intervener had been switched and wasn't who they thought it was. So keeping that in mind, what we learned from that is that if somebody is working with a couple of different people but doesn't realize they're different people, but the expectations keep changing, it sets them up for significant confusion. Okay, if the expectations can't be similar, you particularly want to make sure that somebody knows that the person with each of those expectations is different. It's kind of like my friends who tell me that, you know, the class when the teachers talk about their child, they're kind of like, are we talking about my kid? Really? You know, because he's not necessarily the same way at home. So we need good team discussion and consensus about what the expectations are, especially when you're in the same setting. You know, family members may have different expectations, you know, for lots of different reasons. But if you're in an educational setting, in the same setting, it's even more important that the expectations are well and easily understood. Okay, and when they're all over the map, that's not easily understood. Those interacting communicate using their identified modes of communication. You know, there's a few things on this list that I call kind of think of as that should be kind of a no-brainer, but sadly, they need to be on the list because we need to draw people's attention to them. That the communication mode that is either identified by people in the know or are preferred by the individual themselves are the communication modes that need to be used. Okay, and it's up to the people interacting with them to learn the communication systems, not the other way around. Okay, and here is one of our interpreters communicating using this student's preferred and identified mode of communication. And clearly it looks like very positive interaction taking place. They're both smiling and using using tactual signing. Okay, we're a few more. This is the last slide, I think, of our point, learning style points. Okay, so when they're encouraged to learn from their mistakes and natural consequences, okay, this is kind of within safe parameters, within reasonable parameters, that I think sometimes what happens is we want to make everything just run perfectly. Okay, and this is also a significant training point for interveners, that, you know, sometimes it's okay. It's just okay if sometimes the student that you're working with makes a mistake, and teaching them that it's okay, and how to maybe go about sorting out what went wrong. You know, it's an opportunity for some real teaching of concepts when they make a mistake. And yeah, so we don't want everything to always be fixed, and sometimes this like I say, this is a training issue, and because it's hard for interveners, and sometimes it's hard for the people around them to see that, well, you were right there. Why not? Of course, nothing that isn't safe, but you were right there. How did he pour more milk in the cup than the cup will hold when you were sitting right there? Well, that maybe was part of a learning experience. And so learning that, okay, now here's what happens when we overpour this. Now it's running down the sides and there's some on the table. But here's what we can do. We can teach you how to know how far it is from the top, and we can teach you to clean this up. Okay, so that when we think of how much we learn from the mistakes that we made, we have to first realize they were a mistake. And that might be part of the first thing that you need to do, is to point out, oh my goodness, look at this. The milk is now outside of the glass. It's on the table. Okay, how can we fix this? What can we do differently next time? Okay, I remember once when I was working as a consultant in schools here in Ontario, seeing a student where this had not been part of the protocol of interacting with the student, and what the intervener, who was wonderful, really, but thinking she was doing the right thing, but what she had done is, prior to the student ever handing in a math sheet, she had always made sure that the answers were right. So the student had corrected them, so before it got to the teacher. Okay, and so what happened was, this student was accustomed to always getting her papers back pretty pretty perfect with little stickers on them. And at one point when she moved into to another the next year, whereby the teacher would go around and she was marking papers before they got to correct everything. The student was just flabbergasted one day when an X went on the paper. And she wanted to erase the X for sure, and the answer to fix it. You know, and it was kind of this was really just the fact that she thought the paper always had to be perfect. You know, and partly she had experienced that, so she had reason to have developed that concept. Okay, and what we ended up doing was taking her around to other students in the class and talking to each student and kind of talking about how many, did you make a mistake? How many mistakes did you make? You know, how do you feel about the fact that you made a mistake? What are you going to do differently next time? So that she could go kind of live almost vicariously initially through their thought process, and learn from them that it was okay. You know, the other thing that sometimes happens again, and this is a little bit in feedback, similar but different, working with students who when they're not feeling well, don't ever say so. And often I remember working in a school where we kind of came as a group to realizing that is this partly because all of the examples they have are here and healthy, but when we're away, they don't necessarily know why we're away or what we're kind of experiencing. So it got to the point where from that point on, if people were absent, the students were made aware, you know, of some of the details in terms of, oh, you know, yes, I was sick, I had the flu. How do you feel? You know, typically we always would say fine, I'm good. And we started changing the tone of that to, you know what, I'm a little bit tired today. I stayed up a little bit too late last night, you know, watching Stephen Colbert, and now I'm a little bit tired. So those kinds of things are what we call, in reference back, real life models, giving them information that in many cases, if they had vision and hearing, they would be able to access that information. They'd hear students talking about that they were away because they were sick. You know, they'd see that, gee, not everybody is looking their perkiest today. Okay. When they're provided with experiential learning opportunities, okay, this point sort of goes back to the whole Apple thing, that these students really learn by experience. That gives them a lot of information. And it also, what the experience does is it gives the team an opportunity to build a communication and concepts around what they're experiencing. If they've had an experience, you have a frame of reference upon which you can build concepts, and you can build vocabulary or communication. Okay, we kind of used to say, you know, in the early stages, if the student hasn't experienced it, then we don't really have anything that's meaningful to talk to them about. Okay, they need something to be able to apply that that experience with the formal communication. Okay, like us all, I think we learn best when we're enjoying the activity. Okay, we have the option that hopefully, you know, we can learn things because we know that we might need that information. But certainly, does enjoying it make it hopefully even better, make it easier to attend to? you know, for I think we all can probably relate to this, that when we're enjoying it, when we're comfortable, we're open, we're more open to taking in new information. Okay, when they're encouraged to maximize the use of their residual vision and hearing. So one of the issues sometimes with even the term deafblind is that it sounds so total. It sounds like somebody can't access any visual information or any auditory information. And in actual fact, probably at least 80% of individuals who are identified as deafblind are able to access some residual, some visual and or auditory information. And so if they can, we want to learn what that is and under what circumstances it is best for them. You know, is lighting a fact in somebody being able to, for example, access more visual information, or is a quiet environment? Does that make it easier for somebody to access auditory information? We need to know if there's the potential there, and we need to know under what circumstances that could best happen. Okay. And then we need to encourage them to do that, because if they can gather some information on their own, that's hugely helpful. It's hugely helpful to particularly the intervener and the entire team that somebody is accessing information on their own, and that maybe what you have to do as the interviewer is fill in the gaps or fill in any information that wasn't well understood or could have been confused. Okay, when they're encouraged to maximize the use of all of their senses. So individuals who are deafblind make very good use, or we hope that we can teach them to make very good use of their sense of touch, of their sense of smell. You know, if you're in a school with a pool, you know, students might be able to smell chlorine long before they get to the actually get to the door of the pool, or before they get to the cafeteria. You know, there is a lot of information that I think when you're using vision and hearing, you don't necessarily pay attention to how much information you could get through other senses if you needed to. So that's another kind of training point for interveners and members of the team. How else can someone access their information outside of vision and hearing that might not typically be thought about? Okay, this next slide has 3 pictures on it, just to kind of illustrate a couple of the previous points. The first one, a little girl on a chair with looks like 3 different colored pumpkins or gourds of some type, and she's got a big smile on her face. So she clearly appears to be enjoying the activity, or at least enjoying having her picture taken at that particular time. The second picture is a young man wearing his sunglasses and a life jacket, and looks like he either has been or is in a boat, and he is holding up close to his face a small little fish, live fish that he has clearly caught. So a great actual experience. You know, we can kind of only surmise, but we can kind of use this as a little bit of a learning tool, in the sense that he's experiencing the real of fishing and catching a fish, feeling what a fish feels like, and maybe it's a little bit slimy, you know, so that he's experiencing some of the characteristics of that fish, so that those characteristics can then be labeled, can then be identified, can then have communication attached to it. Okay, he's also developing that that whole bodily experience that also can be, you know, he's got a smile on his face there. So it's we can now also attach maybe some emotion. Maybe as he was pulling that in, or somebody else was helping him to do that, maybe he was wondering or anxious about, will the fish make it into the boat? How big will that fish be? Just the whole experience. So it gives you something to attach some emotions to. Okay, there's just so many things that can come from the experience that can later be then maybe emphasized in more abstract forms. Okay, and the third picture is a young lady who is looking quite close at some information on a poster. And it just so happens, I think it's the various types of ice cream that was available at like an ice cream truck. And so she clearly has been encouraged to look at the pictures of the various types of ice cream to, in this case, maybe select the one she wants, or also I see that the price is there. So she's being encouraged to use her residual vision to access that information. Okay. So now what? Now that we hopefully have maybe a little bit of a sense of the impact of deafblindness, or based on your experience, you might have significant awareness of that, and that we have a sense of some of the circumstances under which they might learn best.
Carolyn, this is
Yeah.
Deanna. I just wanted to read another comment
Sure.
in the chat from Rocky. He says, even if students have residual vision and hearing, expecting them to rely on these senses, especially if their loss is progressive, will not adequately prepare them to function as deafblind adults. Emphasis needs to be placed on their sense of touch, taste, and smell.
Okay, great point. Great point. That that particularly those who might have degenerative conditions, of which there are many. And the other thing is too, even if the condition is stable, it may not be stable in all environments. So that's a great point. Thanks so much, Rocky. Okay, so what do we do now? What's going to be kind of our strategies? You know, recognizing that was kind of how the concept, these previous points is, and experiencing that is kind of how the philosophy of intervention and the whole concept of the intervener came to be. Okay, and so why is it that we choose to use the services of an intervener that is kind of is implementing what we call the philosophy of intervention? Okay, the philosophy of intervention, some of the key points that are behind that is that we see it as something that compensates for the loss of vision and hearing. Okay, it's not ever going to do entirely, but it compensates in the sense that we hopefully can provide alternative means of providing visual and auditory information. Encompassed in intervention is the belief that individuals can process information if they can access it. Okay, and I think that goes across the board. We can't, none of us can process information that we can't access. So that if we can find a format by which we can ensure that the information has been accessed, then we can help people to process. Okay, it's built on a belief that trust is essential and that trust is different from dependency. Okay, and we're going to talk more about that this afternoon. Okay, but I'll encourage you to just kind of think about that and how it might relate to this population. Okay, the right to access information. Okay, I think that goes without saying that that they have a right to access information, and we therefore have an obligation to try to figure out what's the best way for them to access the information. Okay, so with that being said, we look to the philosophy of intervention, and we see that really it's viewed as the primary mode by which individuals who are deafblind access visual and auditory information that they're unable to gather on their own as a result of their loss of vision and hearing. Okay, and that the provision of intervention is ultimately seen as the provision of information. So if you're an intervener in this group, you want to think of yourself as the provider of information. The provider of information that an individual can't access as a result of their loss of vision and hearing. Okay, I mean, you're a whole lot more than that, but from an intervention perspective, from a deafblind perspective, that's a huge part of the role of the intervener. Okay. Okay, we're gonna start now with a little bit about little more about the philosophy of intervention. It's operationalized by some principles, okay, that we call the principles of intervention. Okay, and there were originally 10, now there are 11. And I'm going to go through these, and I hope that you will think about what these might look like when you're interacting with the students that you're familiar with. Okay, and I also want you to see how some of the previous information is encompassed in this philosophy, which makes perfect sense. To me, the needs of the individual who's deafblind are at the forefront of everything. And so once we recognize what the needs are, we're building support and provision around that, around what their needs are. So it makes sense that a philosophy that supports people who are deafblind supports the needs that they have. Okay, so let's just look at the first one. Okay, and each of these, I think you might see that they're, initially you might see that, well, these kind of apply to everyone, don't they? I'm going to focus on their, how they're reflected in deafblindness. Okay, why are they kind of an important principle as it relates to deafblindness? Okay, so the first one is a total and unconditional belief in and respect for an individual with deafblindness. Okay, you know, if you have or are working with students who maybe have other needs other than deafblindness, you might think, well, that applies to them too, and it probably does. But one of the reasons why this is so pertinent in the area of deafblindness is that individuals who are deafblind shouldn't have to shouldn't have to earn the respect of an individual or of people believing in them. And again, left to their own devices, you know, they don't always present with the ability that they have. And it takes kind of a team that's in tune with the individual, with the student, to realize that the potential that they have and to help draw that out of them. Okay, so I think that sometimes people base their thoughts about what an individual who's deafblind can or cannot do on their initial observations. And really the belief should be unconditional. Okay. Okay. Principle 2, a total and unconditional belief in the value of intervention for all individuals with deafblindness. Okay. If we see intervention as the provision of visual and auditory information, then despite any other disabilities in addition to deafblindness that someone might experience, and some have significant physical disabilities in addition, some have significant developmental disabilities in addition, or emotional disabilities, they the intervention part of it, the idea that they need access to visual and auditory information is underlying. It's all of those other things. Yes, they need to be considered, they need to be addressed, but individuals shouldn't have to earn. They shouldn't have to demonstrate that they can benefit from an intervener before being provided with an intervener. That's a little like the test before the lesson. Okay, and we don't want to go there. We want to make sure that people have access, and then hopefully they're able to process and to move forward with that information at whatever level that might be. Okay, so and this kind of comes from in the early years of developing the intervener model. People not necessarily thinking that some of those individuals with more multiple needs could benefit from interveners. And I think that time and time again, that's been proven wrong. And I think that many times people have been astounded at the progress a student can make when they have access to information in a format that they can actually process. Okay. Principle 3, the amount of intervention and the form that it will take must be individualized to meet the specific needs and desires of each individual with deafblindness. Okay, I think if you even just think back to, we have represented here in the group all 4 sort of individuals who based on their time of onset of deafblindness. And hopefully you could see within each one of those how extensive the spectrum in each could be. Okay. And so what the intervention is going to look like from one student to another student could be completely different. And so I would encourage you, the more individuals with deafblindness that you can get to know, can observe, can interact with, the better. Because we say, if you've met one student with deafblindness, you've met one student with deafblindness. Okay, and that interveners will tell you that the underlying philosophy of what we're doing is actually the same. we're providing information. But what that looks like, how much information, how detailed the information is, it is completely different from one to the next. So an intervener, part of an intervener's training is could be exposure to the other individuals, because interveners will tell you that moving from one student to another, in some cases, it might be more, somewhat similar. In other cases, it could be completely different. It could mean, the difference between working with somebody from strictly a tactual mode who maybe is profoundly deaf and has has light perception, to somebody who and has maybe additional disabilities, to somebody who has some residual vision and hearing and has no additional I mean, the spectrum is huge. Okay, so the amount and what it looks like has to be individualized to the specific needs of each individual. Okay, and I think what I'm going to do now is our next slide, I'm hoping, is a video. And if it works, that should take us right to lunch. So let's just see.
I can share that for you, Carolyn. I'm all set and ready to go for you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Ann, because I see that the arrow is not there.
I want to explain and emphasize that interveners, which I sign in this way, are vital for deafblind students attending schools. Please understand that interveners are not personal care attendants. That is a separate issue, and I'm speaking only of interveners and their role in education. Deafblind students struggle to access educational environments. A sighted, hearing person accesses information in the usual way. Someone who's deaf uses an interpreter and relies on lip reading. Someone who is deafblind, having a more profound disability, can easily become isolated from what is happening in the environment, missing lots of information, and falling behind in their education. That is not what we want at all. We need students to be connected, to stay involved in their education. An intervener helps feed information about what is being seen and heard all around the student. What is the teacher doing? What are other students doing? What is needed to support the student? This is incredibly beneficial and supportive in helping the student stay up on what is happening. It really is a means of providing equal access for the student and allows them to participate as an equal in the school environment.
Okay, I hope everybody had a good lunch. And we're going to continue on with our principles. I just wanted to mention I think the young man in the video does a good job of advocating for the intervener's role and clarifying it a bit from his perspective. So I think that's some great information. Okay. Okay, so our principle 4 is that individuals who are deafblind have a right to access information in their preferred modes of communication. I spoke briefly to this earlier. The other thing I wanted to mention was the principles here are kind of the driving force behind what interveners do. They're kind of, think of them almost guidelines. There are so many variables that you can't really write the book for every possible circumstance or individual. So the best we can do is ongoing training and have a set of principles that help to kind of guide the philosophy of what we do, and then have individuals kind of trained to adapt or apply that philosophy to the individuals that they're working with. Okay. Intervention is doing with, not for. And those of you who maybe have been in the field for a little while, you've probably heard this. This has kind of become a little bit of the intervener motto almost, that interveners do with individuals who are deafblind. And a big piece of the reasoning why they do that is because it provides the experience. Okay, it provides the experience. It also often helps to establish that bond built on trust when you're doing things with someone. It applies to so many of the key points that we've already discussed. Things like the motivation. You know, often initially the activity itself may not be perceived by the individual as very motivating in and of itself. But sometimes individuals will engage in the activity because they are asked to do that.
I just heard back from 917 about that audio equipment.
By somebody that they trust, and by somebody whom they find motivating. So the doing with it provides a lot of information that might otherwise be inaccessible to the student that you're working with. And our next slide here, it has a number of pictures of interveners doing with. Again, all interveners from Minnesota, who the first one here, you know, they are in one of those, it looks like one of those little booths with the hats on, both looking like they are really enjoying the activity. And the interveners kind of efforts to engage, you know, they are kind of all over that photo. I think that the you know, it's just such a great experience, and it's a great experience for both really for the intervener too. Having you know, being an intervener or interact with many individual students who are deafblind, it's exciting for both of you when you're really enjoying what you're engaged in, and when you know that your support and your efforts are being felt by the student, and that it's having such a positive impact. Okay, the next picture there is a picture of the intervener's hands and the student's hands, both engaged around the feeling of a flower. Okay, and so, for example, if this was a texture that was unfamiliar to the student, then having their hands on top of yours and having them be able to maybe feel parts of it, feel comfortable with it, feel like you're feeling it, and you're doing fine. So it is encouraging for them. It also gives you an opportunity to kind of adjust your hands a little bit so that maybe they feel a little bit more of it. You know, and you can probably get a good sense from the feeling in their hands how willing they might be to do that. Okay, another picture here is of an intervener with her hands on a couple of sticks that looks like they're the student is kind of, their arms are around the student, kind of holding two sticks and tapping them together, while another young girl has the sticks and a large ball in front of her that she's probably hitting the sticks with. And so again, the intervener is doing with, which allows in this case, this student to participate with a classmate. Okay, and the last picture here, which I think is really creative, it's a young girl in a wheelchair with her intervener to her right side, and you can see that she is supporting this young girl at the elbow and the young girl's hand is on this long pole, which has some sort of a paint and print kind of on the other end of it, and they're basically pushing it towards a larger piece of paper that another person is holding on a hard framed back, so that they can basically, this young girl can participate in this art activity from her wheelchair with the support of her intervener, but also with her hand on it, on the pole. So it really, you know, they're engaged in this activity. So I think these are great photo examples of interveners doing with. Okay, the sixth principle, no assumption should be made regarding the abilities of an individual with deafblindness. Okay, I think this comes, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, about with the whole idea that people make assumptions. People with vision make very quick assumptions about things that they see without necessarily having all of the information. Okay. And it also, many of these students have additional disabilities. So the goal sort of with the intervener is being able to provide increased access, providing some enjoyment in an activity, being able to participate with other people, and kind of moving from A to B, whatever A to B is for that student. So I'm sure that anybody who works in this field long enough will have at least one, maybe a couple, hopefully not too many, because you learn from the first few, not to put a ceiling on what a student's abilities are, despite their deafblindness. Okay, I think people are more often surprised in the positive end, in terms of what so many of these students with the right supports can actually attain. Okay, principle number 7. Never underestimate the importance of the relationship between the intervener and the individual. Okay, that relationship, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the future, because it's something that some people initially are hesitant about. It's maybe a little bit atypical from interactions that other staff may have with students who are not deafblind. But I think there's some very good reasons based on the nature and the needs of students who are deafblind, why that relationship built on trust is so important. That a large part of encouraging participation is doing things with people that you trust and that you are familiar with. And a lot of time, if you're somebody in this group today who is just going to be starting with a new student, with a new student, or maybe just starting with the very first student that you've worked with, or if you're classroom teacher, therapist, nurse, whomever, it's well worth engaging in some interactions that will build on that relationship. Okay, the process of intervention must always provide the individual who's deafblind with the information required for anticipation, motivation, communication, and confirmation. Okay, and so this comes up again. that if this is a primary impact of deafblindness, then clearly the role of intervention and the intervener should be to address this. Okay, so like I said earlier, the fact that you can just sit back and go over the activities and what you do in a day with an individual, and then maybe address how you're going to provide them with the information that they can anticipate things. And what am I going to do that will provide them with some information that might be motivating? How am I going to communicate things to somebody? And again, there's an entire communication spectrum of a wide variety of methods and techniques that we know work. It's more a matter of teaching people what they are, training them to use them, and then being able for the team to assess which ones are most appropriate for a student at any one time. And then providing the confirmation. And hopefully you can also see how these things all work together. That anticipation can lead, that in order to have somebody anticipate, then you probably need to communicate something, and that anticipation can be motivating and confirmation can be motivating, and you need a way to communicate how you're confirming. So the four of these are sort of an entity unto themselves, but they also work in combination with one another. Okay, every experience is an opportunity to provide information and to encourage interaction. Okay, so think of every activity that you are engaging in as something that you could create interaction around, and you could also create communication around. You know, I've had the experience where sometimes you set up, you know, an event or a field trip or something that you think is going to be a real highlight. And I did have this happen once in a classroom. And when we came back from a field trip, and students were asked, you know, what did they like best about that field trip? It was interesting to see that a third of the students enjoyed the bus ride. The bus was their favorite thing. So, you know, who would have thought of that? At that time, we were thinking the bus is just the vehicle by which we get to the event. And that, I think, was a lesson to us all at the time that, you know what? The bus ride was an activity in and of itself. And it was something that we could do a lot of concept development around, communication around, and clearly was a highlight for some. Okay, here's another slide with some pictures of experiences that students with deafblindness have had. And I think if you just even take a close look at each picture, first one being a young lady who is on a beach, you know, just sitting in a few inches of water. Looks like she's kind of maybe taking in the possible, you know, maybe the breeze or the smells of, you know, the water, the ocean. And think about all of the forms of communication and the concepts that could be developed around just that very simple experience. And then another experience, clearly a young lady with her family in a marina. You know, maybe they've been on a boat, maybe they're just walking around looking at boats. But again, another experience. And another picture of a young man who I think is on a fire truck, possibly here, or in talking to some, I think it looks like a fireman, but again, a whole nother experience. So the actual, and the last one is a little boy in a swing. Okay, and again, he looks like this is something that he enjoys. And let's think about all of the concepts or the communication that could be developed around this experience, his experience with this. Okay, keeping in mind that the focus is on the experience of the student. Okay, so keeping these experiences are maybe outside of the classroom, but let's just think now, let's look at doing a little chat. And what I'd like you to do is in the chat box, to chat your thoughts. I'd like you to share an experience that provides information and a basis for communication to a student with deafblindness that you know. Okay, so yeah, let's just see what kinds of things, what kinds of experiences in the classroom or the school or the outside the school do you provide for the students, so that maybe some of the new people get an idea of some of the experiences. And again, they don't have to be anything huge like a field trip. They think of all of the kinds of experiences.
Carolyn, this is Deanna. A couple of comments in the chat are, Deborah said she provides sign language. Rebecca says the person that she supports loves to bake. So they follow a recipe, feel all the ingredients and smells. Kathleen said a trip to a local coffee shop. Mary Beth says weekly grocery store shopping, and a couple of items on their list.
Okay, that's great. Any note here?
Natalie says student in the health office with a bloody nose explaining the cares. I am giving a quick explanation of others who are in the health office. And then Elizabeth said different textures on the floor, maybe explaining those, feeling those.
Yeah, absolutely. Living, I'm thinking Natalie's, I think it was Natalie's example there of even kind of trying to living vicariously through the experience of another student is great, and covers so many areas in terms of even some socialization and awareness of other people.
Shannon shared, my student loves to go for walks outside and talk about her daily schedule. Amanda says, my student is taking a community-based vocational class, which volunteers at different community sites. Shelley says, pair experience outside, leaves with the autumn books we are learning in Braille. Janie said how to travel on the bus using a communication card. Hannah said her student loves the playground and learning what each feature is made out of and color and how it moves.
Okay, and the great thing is it sounds like a number of people you know what your students like. You know the kinds of experiences that they've maybe had and enjoyed. And if you can pull things out of there that you know that they like, and then offer those, similar but different, is a way of expanding on some of those very positive experiences. And it also means that you can move the communication and the language from one activity to something else that might be familiar, and see how you can apply known language.
Chong Min explained different plants and flowers while the deafblind student participated in a camp. It looks like, a smell like, etc. Oh, what it looks like and smells like, etc. Sherry said her student loves music. And then Laura commented that lots of play. I am working with a few early childhood students. We are still working on finding their preferences. Yep. Well, for our early childhood students, we know that play is learning, so that's great.
Hey, that's terrific. And you know, there's been a lot of great activities. And even if you think of the there's kind of the optional things that you do in a day, but there's also maybe those things that maybe are a little more repetitive or mundane, but are still activities. Things like experiencing their locker, you know, or the hook where they hang up their coat every day, or experiencing where things are located in the classroom. Think of, you can build interest and communication around pretty much any activity that they're taking part in. Okay. Yeah, that's a great. Okay. Oh, no, there we go. Okay, principle 10. The focus of the intervention should always be on the needs of the individual who's deafblind. Okay, this kind of falls into, you know, on one hand, I think this is kind of, wouldn't this be obvious, but it's one of those that needs to be said. You know, as interveners, we're very much working sort of in the background, where our role is focusing on the student and their needs, and you know, so that they're out front, and we're the support person. Okay. And we just need, you know, that isn't always easy to remember. It's not that interveners don't have needs too, but you know, this is something that we put in here because it needs to kind of be a constant reminder. Okay. Okay, and the final principle here, okay, and this is the one that was added, whoops, okay, that intervention is recognized as a process that requires interveners to have specific skills, knowledge, and experiences in order to be effective in providing the best possible opportunity for people with deafblindness to gather information, process it, and develop communication, concepts, and skills. So that principle is a bit of a big mouthful, but it's a very important one. It's recognizing just how much there is to know, and recognizing how you know, people who are deafblind know how to be deafblind, but people who are sighted and hearing don't have, as I said in the beginning, don't really have a frame of reference. So we approach the world in very different ways. And so that means that it's not intuitive to us as to what to do, or what to focus on, or to how to compensate necessarily for vision and hearing. It just isn't something that comes intuitively to people. It's something that you know, some people might have an idea of without a lot of formalized teaching, but most people need to have some of these points really brought out, and they need to spend some time thinking about them and thinking about how they're going to apply them to those individuals that they're working with. So there's there's a fair amount to know. And I think the most important thing is that someone, another human being, is really counting on us to know about deafblindness and to have some strategies to address their needs. And so I just want to really speak to the importance. This isn't necessarily something that that you can kind of intuitively in the beginning just figure out. And I think that's where we have maybe really underappreciated the perspective from which parents come. That there's a lot of learning that goes on. And how do you approach a student who's deafblind as a parent?
What?
Of a
Can't hear you.
Of a young, especially of an infant, you know, it's not something that we can relate to typically without some form of support or help or training or education. Okay, so I realize I'm speaking to the converted because you're here today, so that's great. And after today, the great news is that you are involved or connected with, or you probably wouldn't be here if you weren't somehow connected with these three great people who are a team who truly recognizes the complex training needs of interveners. And so they are going to provide you with ongoing support to be the best at intervening or interacting with individuals who are deafblind as is possible. So here's my plug to feel free to contact them. Okay. Oops. Okay, this is a quote from a consumer. And I just think that this is the highest tribute that someone who's deafblind could make in terms of the interveners that he's had in his life. And the quote is, without intervention, it would be like being deafblind again. And this is a young man who in his late teens became deafblind pretty much overnight. Sighted and hearing prior to that. And so he has true sense of what it was like not to be deafblind, and feels that the support and the information and the access to the world around him that he receives through his support system, which involves a number of different people, but certainly interveners, and that without that, it would be like being deafblind again. So I just wanted to share that. I always like to share that one because I think it's really a tribute. It's something that we all want to aspire, as interveners want to aspire to. Okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at 3 different scenarios. And we're going to look at try to get a sense of what might intervention look like, and by comparison, by comparing what the same activity with what a wonderful caregiver, a great assistant, and an intervener, how it might each might look a little bit different. Okay, clearly, I hope that by the time we go through this, that the 3 of them, that it gives you a better sense of maybe what the difference is, because this is a very common question. Okay, what is the difference and what does it look like? And sometimes it's a little bit challenging to see, but part of that is because we can't necessarily get inside the head of what the intervener is thinking in terms of what the purpose of their actions might be. Okay, so let's just try going through this and see if it makes sense to you. The activity or the interaction in this case is going to be Tammy, who is deafblind, requires a bowl for her morning cereal. Okay, so I also want to clarify by caregiving. I'm kind of here. I'm thinking that this is like someone's grandmother. Okay, that Tammy. So this is what Tammy's grandmother might do. She might retrieve the bowl from the kitchen cupboard and brings it to Tammy, who's seated at the kitchen table. And if this is in fact Tammy's grandmother, I'm good with that. That's real, you know, that's maybe really good caregiving. Okay. All right. Somebody who would be providing assistance might show Tammy where the bowls are. Okay. Might help her to physically retrieve one. She needs some help, can't reach it. And might direct her to sit at the table. Okay. Okay. On the other hand, what I might expect from an intervener might be that the intervener involves Tammy in the process of realizing she needs a bowl. Okay, so picture that maybe the intervener and Tammy are both sitting at the table or standing at a counter, and they're examining or shaking a box of cereal. Right? So with the idea that, I wonder, Tammy's had cereal in a bowl before. Might Tammy know what the next step is? Okay, the idea of kind of providing some information, but then let's just see here, give Tammy a chance to think about this and then act on what she might be thinking. Okay, the intervener is going to involve Tammy in the process of learning where the bowls are. Okay, so this might look like, oh, they're opening and closing. Maybe they open and close a couple of cupboards and feel in there, look in there. If Tammy has a little bit of vision and see, is there a bowl in there? Is this where they're kept? Okay, until they get to the spot where they are. An intervener might provide the support necessary for Tammy to obtain the bowl. She needs any physical support to do so. Or encouragement that, you know, she might need some confirmation. Yes, what you're feeling there, that is a bowl. And then see, okay, wait and see, okay, now that you've shared the information, yes, that is a bowl. And if she knows she needs a bowl, might she act on that? Okay, involving Tammy in the process involving Tammy in the process of understanding that she now needs to sit at the table and providing the confirmation. Okay, so you're sitting at the table. You're here's the box of cereal, and now what do we need to do? So at each moment, trying to give Tammy some opportunity to maybe think about the information that's most recently been conveyed. Okay, so that's one example, and I think I'm also showing you these examples so that so that you can kind of learn to think like an intervener, basically. Because I think that's the key to being a long-term to being an effective intervener, is to kind of have an understanding of a process like this, and thinking like an intervener. And it's interesting, you know, I have had various opportunities to have people talk about their first initial experiences observing trained interveners at work. And it's amazing how many of people will say they just seem to think differently. And what they do and what they provide is typically a little bit different than people working potentially with other individuals who may have other disabilities, but who are not deafblind. So, so I feel like I'm pretty comfortable saying we need to demonstrate that we understand intervention. We need to learn to think like an intervener. Okay, let's just see. So that's our first example, and let's just see if we'll go to the second example. Okay, here our activity or our interaction, okay, is Megan needs to take her swimsuit to her swimming class. Okay. Okay, so somebody working in a caregiving mode might retrieve the swimsuit from a hook in Megan's locker, put it in the bag that's attached to the back of Megan's wheelchair. Okay, and off they go to swim. Somebody working as an assistant might tell Megan that she has swim class and needs her swimsuit, takes Megan to the locker, shows her where the swimsuit is hanging, physically assists her to retrieve it, puts it in a bag that's attached to the back of Megan's wheelchair. Okay. What I might expect from an intervener would be that the intervener uses Megan's calendar process to let her know that she'll be going swimming. Okay, so that she can anticipate that. Okay, and that anticipation might give her some time to think about where she's going. Might she think about, I like that, I don't like that, what do I need? Oh, it looks like we're going swimming. Well, where's my swimsuit? Include Megan in the process of understanding that she needs to take her swimsuit. Okay, encourage Megan to use her residual vision and tactual skills to locate her swimsuit on the hook in the locker. Okay. Provides only the physical assistance. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Provide only the physical assistance required to retrieve the swimsuits from the hook, and encourages Megan to hold onto the swimsuit while they walk to the pool so that she has a continued confirmation as to where she's going. So that if you get partway down a hall and maybe Megan is looking like she is wanting to go in a different direction, that you have a way of letting her know, no, feel this swimsuit. What does this mean? What activity is this affiliated with? That's what you're trying to get her to think about. This is where we're going. So where the place we're going is where you use this piece of material, which is your swimsuit. Okay. Hopefully what you can see here is that the process of all of this is as important as what goes on once you get to the pool. Okay, and it's especially important if what we're hoping to create is a sense of independence, is giving somebody a sense of some control. We're giving them the information, hopefully the tools they need to down the road do that. Okay, our last example here, okay, is going to be Jason. And he needs to get from one classroom to another in his high school. Okay, so someone in a caregiving role might push Jason quickly in his wheelchair to save time. Okay, sometimes high schools are big and we have a long way to go sometimes in between classes. So leaves the class 5 minutes early to avoid the crowds in the hallway. Okay. Some assistants might provide or let Jason know that it's time to go to his next class. Allow Jason to wheel his wheelchair unless he just doesn't want to that day. Tell Jason when and where to turn. Point out landmarks. And they leave the class 10 to 15 minutes early to avoid the crowded hallway because it takes more time when Jason wheels his own chair. Okay. And from an intervener, I might expect that the intervener with hopefully the guidance of an orientation and mobility instructor might help Jason learn the route. Okay, include Jason in the process of understanding the importance of wheeling his own chair since he is able and he's building up endurance where necessary. Practices the route when the halls are empty, allowing Jason time to use his residual vision to find landmarks and problem solve should he make a wrong turn. Okay, again, if he chooses to go down the wrong hallway, is there a way of, if that is by mistake, then we may be able to teach him via that error to go the right way the next time. Okay. Uses Jason's calendar system to let him know when it's time to leave class and which class is next. Leaves the class at the same time his peers do. Encourages Jason to say hello and talk to his peers as he moves through the hall. Teaches the peers how Jason communicates and how to approach and interact with him. Okay. Once Jason and his peers are comfortable communicating with one another, walks a ways behind Jason and his friends or his peers or his friends so as not to interfere with the social interactions, but close enough to provide any intervention required. Okay. So, I mean, those are just 3 of millions of little kind of glimpses at 3 different scenarios and 3 different individuals. But the process of thinking that through and the process of learning more and more about what interveners do and in terms of the information that needs to be shared. Again, that is often the extent or the depth with which you present information is typically something that your whole team needs to kind of look at and make decisions around what's appropriate for a particular student. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a glimpse of what we're looking to the intervener to do and the process that we're looking for the intervener to think like. Okay, next we're going to look at, okay, I'm just going to speak briefly here to also thinking about the role of the intervener and the difference between kind of the role from an intervention perspective and a job description. Okay, because the philosophy behind is the same, but the way in which it's applied and the job description part of it is going to vary depending on where you work, whom you work for, maybe the student themselves. But for the most part, interveners would, in fact, we've done pretty well here. For the most part, interveners would adapt materials prepared by the teacher. Okay, certainly that's not to say that teachers don't give interveners an option to be creative and whatnot, but the direct responsibility for the materials is probably in most cases the classroom teachers. And interveners may enlarge, they may simplify, they may, sometimes the physical appearance of something may need to be modified to meet the needs. Certainly, they provide access to information in the environment. In most cases, on a one-to-one basis, primarily because it's a very challenging job to intervene with more than one person at a time. So for the most part, in most places it's considered a one-on-one job. Okay, typically the classroom teacher or others would be the primary contact with families. Interveners may become aware of materials. The more, I think, training and exposure you have, and just maybe even an interest, there are certainly a lot of materials and available ideas, websites, all kinds of things that interveners may bring forth to members of the team. But the actual curriculum would be designed by the classroom teacher. Facilitating interaction and communication with staff and other classmates, absolutely part of the role of the intervener. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Interveners that I've worked with often keep notes, and some will keep like a binder, because typically it's sometimes, depending on how many other people are involved with the student you're working with, sometimes it's a little bit of a revolving door. And so how to communicate between the various different professionals that may be there to support you and the student, without some kind of organized fashion, it can be challenging to communicate some of those kinds of things. So my experience has been, it's really how involved they are in IEP meetings and whatnot is dependent on where and whom they work for. And implementing lesson plans and activities that have been planned by a licensed staff. That's absolutely. The interveners are implementing is a big piece of often what their role is. Okay. Yeah, thanks for participating in that. Okay. What we're going to start now is a little bit about the role of the intervener. Then we'll have a 10-minute break. Okay, and again, these are kind of broad-based and really address more interactions and whatnot with the individual that you're intervening with. Okay, so to provide the degree of support necessary to ensure effective communication. So much of what we're doing as interveners is the development and the ongoing communication, and making that as effective as we possibly can. Okay. If a student develops, the communication to the degree where we can use it as a primary source of providing information, then the more access they have to information, and the less that they may require direct experiences, because the experiences that would give information can be explained through the formalized communication. Not that, although I think that experience, you can't beat firsthand experience, and I think that probably goes for all of us. Okay, to provide accurate feedback about the results of an individual's efforts. Okay, so they need feedback, they need confirmation, and we need to be thinking about that all the time. Again, some of these things and providing information, the more formalized way they have of doing that, then on one hand, it's a little bit, I hesitate to use the word easier, because typically the more language people have, the more involved the explanations are. So one isn't always easier than the other. They're just different. Okay, we want interveners to provide the motivation necessary for the individual with deafblindness to want to become an active part of their environment. We know that if they're actively involved, that they're going to learn more, that they're going to, there's lots of opportunity for engagement, whether that be social engagement or engaged in an activity, or things are going to be more fun if they are more motivated and willing to participate. Okay, so anything you can do to kind of ease that in the early stages while that bond and whatnot especially is being developed. And again, like I said earlier, especially if the activity itself is not found to be thrilling for them and a fun activity, then there's even more reason for you. It's going to be a little bit more work for you to make that motivating. Okay. To provide accurate feedback about the results of the individual's efforts. Okay, wait. To provide the support and reassurance that the sighted hearing individual receives from his environment. Okay, think about, again, all the ways that you receive feedback and all that information that a student who's deafblind doesn't get. And number 6 here, very important, foster opportunities for socialization with family, peers, and persons in the environment. Okay, so this is where we really look at the whole idea that we don't want them to become an island unto themselves. Okay, that we're looking for, once you as an intervener have created a bond and trust with them, that a big part of your role is in fact then to encourage them to develop social interactions with other people. Okay, and that sometimes takes some time and some confidence. And typically, when you think about how many, some of these students, when they enter the school system, have not had a lot of socialization with a lot of other people outside of their immediate family. Okay, so again, anything that's new and unfamiliar, you should expect some resistance to. Once things become more familiar, once they know that they can trust people, it's so much easier. But that idea that I would say that, because this is something that sometimes we are questioned about with the whole role of the intervener, that they go off and do only things with each other. They sometimes the intervener can become a little bit possessive of, this is my student. Okay, that to be honest, that's a performance issue. That is not a problem with the philosophy, because right here in print, you can see that the philosophy or the identified role of an intervener is in fact to create socialization and opportunity with other people. Okay. Okay, and to that, okay, the next thing we're going to just think about here a little bit that relates to this fostering opportunities for socialization. It's kind of along that same line is, okay, let us just think a little bit about independence and deafblindness. Because I think there's kind of a couple of maybe misnomers out there in terms of kind of this point and opposite ends of the scale. So on one hand, there is the thought that, well, if you're deafblind, how could you possibly be independent? Okay. And on the other hand, there is a constant effort about focused on the independence piece without thinking about the impact of deafblindness. And I think that there is somewhere there is a happy medium of the fact that we can take into consideration the impact of deafblindness, and we can also have situations where people who are deafblind are very, very independent. So I just wanted to address each one of these little points here that I've indicated on this slide. The first one is the idea that this is kind of a typical concern of many people. That, you know, independence is it's brought up an awful lot, to be honest. And I think that we don't have enough discussion about it and about what it looks like and what the impact of deafblindness might be on it. And I think one of the things that impact the people who are deafblind that present where it presents an issue for some people that are observing is that the proximity of support, meaning that interveners and individuals who are deafblind in most cases have to work very close together in terms of proximity. So from people watching or observing that, I think they see that when somebody's working that closely with you, how independent can you be? Not taking into consideration that we may have to actually be touching in order to be communicating. Or we might have to be touching in order for an individual to see or to hear what we're doing or what they're being asked to do, or the information that's being shared. So sometimes just the closeness of that lets people in the periphery go in the direction of this person can't be independent, because we tend to have in our heads that to be independent, you have to do it alone. And that independence might be just in that case is more the physical part of it, as opposed to if information is shared with someone and they make a choice or a decision based on the information they've been provided, then that's a demonstration of some independence. Okay, so I think that just the nature of how we have to work with people who are deafblind in terms of proximity inhibits people from seeing them as being independent. Okay, so I'm just gonna ask that going forward, you just maybe think about that a little bit. And also maybe that's something that you may have to explain to other people. Okay, who might have some concerns or voice interest in how independent is this person. Okay, and I guess I would also say if we don't have information, how can any of us be independent? Okay, so if we don't have access to information, how independent would any of us be? Okay.
Carolyn, this is Deanna. I wanted to read a comment from Rocky.
Oh, okay.
He says, I am a firm believer in the idea of presumed competence, which assumes that an individual is capable until proven otherwise. This is not a perfect philosophy, but I believe that if implemented with deafblind students, will allow them to grow to their fullest potential. And I 100% echo that, what Rocky says. And then I also wanted to share, as a parent of a now young adult who is deafblind, early on, before I started working with the DeafBlind Project or really became knowledgeable about deafblindness and how that impacted my son, I was told that the school didn't want to provide an intervener or even a para at that time because they didn't want my son to become dependent on that person. And then once I educated myself and could advocate for him and he was given an intervener, his language skyrocketed and his academic achievements increased. So I 100% believe in the process of intervention and what the interveners provide. But as Carolyn has mentioned many times today, what intervention really truly is and what it looks like, sometimes it's interpreted differently, and sometimes people go off the track a little bit and don't necessarily follow the process of intervention. So it's really not the intervention that's bad, it's just maybe not being carried out in the best way. But it definitely makes a difference for the kids, the students, and the families.
Absolutely. Thank you to both of you for your comments. I appreciate that. I also want you to think many years ago, it kind of dawned on me watching some young typical kids who had, from the time they were very, very young, been applauded, physically, like literally applauded, and verbally with the content of what people would say to them, being encouraged to do things on their own and to be praised for that. So the message that those, I'm talking about typically developing kids, developed based on that was a good thing, in the sense that they learned the concept that doing things on your own, adults seem to be, this is my perception, adults seem to be pretty happy with me when I do things by myself, and they clap and they laugh and they give me a lot of positive feedback, and they confirm that my doing it on my own is a good thing. And that's kind of, I think, the very early stages of learning the concept of independence, and that it's a good thing. And that's not something that my experience has ever shown was something that was really encouraged or done with students who were deafblind. And having been for many years now, very, very next to intervention, my next favorite thing is concept development. So really thinking about how do people learn to understand things, it sort of came to me that, if you don't get that early feedback, that early encouragement, that concept that doing things yourself is viewed positively by people, then maybe why would you do that? And in some cases, I think about it myself. Gee, if somebody would get up and get me a coffee, why would I do it myself? I just sat here long enough, maybe somebody will bring me one. If conceptually that was my thinking, without any other concepts that might actually get me to get up off my chair and get my own coffee, then why would I bother? And so I think that the conceptual understanding piece, is also something that we need to ensure that we have given people exposure to. And I think that so often we have not. And yet we want people to want to be independent, but we haven't really given them the information they need to come to that conclusion. So that's the conceptual piece there. So I just really want people to think about this, because I think that so often some of this can kind of consume people without really thinking beyond. And so the person who it all gets dumped on is the person who's deafblind, and I think very unfairly. So the other thing I want to say is that sometimes, not always, but sometimes it becomes an intervener performance issue. Okay, the encouraging independence is absolutely part of the role of the intervener and the philosophy of intervention. Okay, it's not so if in fact the contrary is happening without effort being put into encouraging it, then even in just the smallest of ways, then potentially it might be a training and thus resulting performance issue. And it might just be that this needs to be brought to somebody's attention, or examples, or strategies on how something could be done differently so that independence can be developed. Okay, so let me just check my notes. Okay, oh, one other point here that I just wanted to make too was also we need to think about how often somebody might have attempted to do something independently, but it wasn't the right time or place. And so, at 3 in the morning, maybe it isn't the right time to get up and be wandering around the house, even if you do want your favorite toy. So sometimes there might have been effort to do something independently, and somebody either squashes that in a hurry, or doesn't think it's in your best interest at this moment, and so they make alternative plans. So that sometimes people have wanted to demonstrate some independence and were unable to do so. Okay, and again, let's face it, everything that we experience lends itself to our conceptual understanding. So if your efforts to demonstrate independence are countered often enough, you get another message. You develop concepts around that might lead to how you perform going forward. Okay. All right, we have 2 last points here for the role of the intervener. Okay, to ensure that every experience is an opportunity for conceptual growth and skill acquisition. Okay, so this idea that as an intervener, we can take any of those, any one of those many activities,
Why did you first say that?
experiences that you're that you and your student are engaged in, and can you turn that into an opportunity to teach them something, or to communicate around it, or to teach a skill? And thus, I think, hopefully, as we're going through this, you can see how focused an intervener has to be on the individual. You know, that it can be an exhausting, physically and mentally, field or profession. It's clear to my mind, I'm biased obviously, but I think it's an amazing field. But do I know how exhausting it can be physically and mentally to be on all the time and focused? And that's a challenge for some people, to stay focused on one person and on what they're doing. But I think the more you do, the more you learn about it, the more you learn about them, and start to see in what they do how they're thinking, the more exciting it is. And the easier it becomes to stay really focused. Okay? Because each time that you move your focus away from them, you might be missing really important information about what they're doing and what they're thinking. Okay, and the last one, to utilize those methods and techniques which provide the best possible opportunity for an individual who's deafblind to compensate for their loss of both vision and hearing. Okay, and the information that is not accessible as a result of. Okay, and the exciting part is, as I said kind of in the beginning, the good news is we do have lots of methods and techniques. I saw in the some of the chat that people talking about implementing calendar systems and schedules and all kinds of different strategies. So the good news is there are lots of methods and techniques and strategies that we can use in order to be able to do that. Okay, and this is a slide, and it was just kind of an interesting for me, being very conceptually focused, that I wanted to share these three pictures with you, just because the similarity in each of them is horse. But the conceptual understanding of each, based on the three different experiences, is very different. So I think I hope that if you look at these pictures long enough, the one of a young boy who kind of wide-eyed and sitting on a carousel horse, holding on with both hands to the pole in the center. Okay, and then this middle picture of a young boy with a riding helmet on, sitting on a saddle on a horse. Okay, and he's holding one rein in each hand, and has his feet in shoes in the stirrups. And then the next picture, the last picture, a little girl in a wheelchair who is feeling the I guess the nose of a horse. Actually, it looks like a lovely little pony. Anyways, I think their three experiences are clearly all very different. Okay, all very valid, all probably very interesting. Okay, but conceptually, if this was their only experience with horse, okay, they are going to each come out of their experience with a very different conceptual understanding. Okay, and I want you to see that the importance of kind of providing a well-rounded experiences, so that somebody has, what would it take for people to get a well-rounded experience of a concept? You know, I suppose really if I said horse, maybe all of us in this group, I think there's like 70 of us or something, that might, all of our experiences with a horse might also be very, very different. Okay, but we have access to information in other ways that can expand our concept. And I think a big piece of working in the deafblind field is how can we provide enough experiences and information that people can develop well-rounded concepts about many, many, many things that are pertinent to them. And it also, I think, I hope, demonstrates that as people working in the field, we need to really think about what our students' experiences have been and how that has framed their concepts. Where the lesson here is where are they coming from into this experience? Okay, and yeah. Okay. Now, okay. This is a quote from an intervener, and like the quote from the individual who is deafblind, I think this one also is inspirational and very telling in terms of the role of the intervener. Okay, so an intervener, this woman won an intervener award here, and this was part of her acceptance speech of the award, and it just made me really think, I know why you got this award, because clearly you have this would indicate to me that you have a pretty good understanding of the role of the intervener. So an intervener is the wind in the sails of an individual who is deafblind. Sometimes we are a soft breeze, other times a gust. When you see the ship moving through the water, it's the person who's deafblind who is at the helm and choosing the course. Okay. I have a couple of handouts that I'm going to just show you on a slide that you're going to have access to after, and you'll also have access to the slides as well. But before we do that, I'd like you to maybe think about what we've done today, talked about, and your participation, which I really appreciate. And I want you to kind of chat your thoughts, okay? Because I think this will be a really good learning experience for everyone as we go through and read them. But I want you to share one thing that you learned or that was reinforced. I recognize that some of you certainly have some experience with this, that you want to implement directly or that you want to remember in order to better support a student with deafblindness or an intervener. Some of you I know are in support roles, or a family member or a related professional. Okay, so let's go to the chat.
This is Deanna. Teresa said guiding, not doing for. Rebecca says, I really like how you talked about conceptual development. Bailey says, reinforce the role of the intervener. Rebecca says, I want to learn more on how to execute those concepts. Becca said, I learned how to better support the interveners in our school, the role of the intervener and what is expected. Oh, expected, where did it go? Versus not expected is clearer to me now. Kathleen says, I want to remember the difference between assisting a deafblind person versus intervening to support their will. Emily says, I greatly appreciated the in-depth overview of what an intervener does. I especially appreciated the discussion around well-rounded conceptual understanding. Carla says conceptual development and the role and importance of interveners. Matt said he wants to check his own biases more frequently and push staff to raise expectations. Vicky says an intervener encourages deafblind students independent access to the world. Jamie says experiencing and starting with the real first when possible when supporting. Hannah said the role of the intervener was explained really well to me, and I understand it a lot more now. Looking forward to working with more interveners in the future. Marissa says differences between caregivers versus assistant versus intervener. Chong Min says reinforce the importance of the intervener's role. Sherry says, I'm new to deafblind. There was so much good information that I can't really single out one thing yet. Natalie says, I have thought of a goal for a student of mine to become more independent with a health condition he has. Matt says, defining the intervener role was huge. Deborah said, to be cognizant of all the forms of communication, aim for intervention instead of assistance. Mary Beth says, I have a much clearer idea of what exactly an intervener's role is. Also the review of anticipation, motivation, etc. for information and interaction for the deafblind students. Elizabeth says how important connections are for those with deafblindness. Heather says, I liked learning and hearing about the areas impacted by deafblindness, anticipation, motivation, communication, and confirmation. And Anne stated again about the 4 principles, the anticipation, motivation, communication, and confirmation, and trying to ensure that all 4 are always considered. Laura stated the idea that deafblind learning may not be intuitive to me, and I need to utilize the students' feedback when designing their learning. Laura Lynn says understanding the intervener role, as well as having more information to share with team members and more consider and incorporate with deafblind, more to consider and incorporate with deafblind kiddos. See, Emily says she's new to the deafblind world and can't wait to dive in. Shannon says, I don't have one takeaway, rather how excited I am about my student's future now that she will have an intervener. She is going to soar. Awesome. Kathleen said the Apple activity really enlightened me regarding how to best explain a concept to a deafblind student. Candace said, we have an intervener for my student this past year for trips to the grocery store, but now we will implement other locations with the intervener. This was very educating. Love the coffee shop idea. I think that's all we've had so far.
Okay. Well,
thank you everyone for participating.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, it's nice to see how many people are excited about getting back at it or getting to it for the first time. That's really great. Okay. Okay, just so you know, there are, as I said, that your team in Minnesota is a wealth of information. This is just one other article, or it's just a 1 page that that could be also very helpful to people about the difference between interveners and paraprofessionals. It's a very common question, and I think it's again, some of these things just are not intuitive, And so it's amazing how many times, you know, it's in many cases, you won't necessarily have to explain these things to people from outside, you know, a million times. When you explain them and you really kind of come at it from a deaf-blind perspective, people get it. It's just that it's not intuitive. And I think there's a big difference between things just being intuitive that just seem kind of, well, everybody can just naturally figure that out, and things being brought to someone's attention and the kind of light bulb goes on and they're like, oh my gosh, okay, I never thought of it that way. And a huge role for those of us who are in deafblind, and I used to tell my students, if you don't like explaining things, this might not be the field for you, because most of the world doesn't know anything about deafblindness, and I think we'll be certainly explaining it throughout my lifetime. That it's a low incidence population, so there are not huge numbers of individuals who are deafblind, although there are, I think, many more than most people would think. But it makes it just means that there are not as many people trained in the field or providing service as there might be in others, and so people just need to kind of be prepared to explain it. But I do believe that in most cases, my experience has been that when you can explain why you're doing something, or why the student potentially might be doing something they're doing, from a deaf-blind perspective, from the impact of vision and hearing on that, that people who are making an effort to listen to you really do get it. Okay, so that is one. And this is just kind of page one of a 4-page article that's I think a little bit newer, but that also is a great summary of about deafblindness. So that is also something that I would encourage you to look into, make a copy of, share with other people, because it too gives some good basic information. Okay. Anne, or I think I've come to an end of my slides. But
I'm just going to go back here just really quickly while this information is fresh in your mind about the document that Carolyn has shared with you. And I'm going to move this over here. So I'm going to show this again. See if you're still tracking me. You are. I want to make sure I'm looking at the screen. Okay. Carolyn mentioned a couple of different documents, and I just wanted to make you aware of the National Center on Deafblindness website. And some of the documents, one of the documents that I'm thinking of is Understanding Deafblindness, the overview of deafblindness. That might be really helpful to you to share on your teams. This is that document that she just shared with you. And so the link will be in the PowerPoint for you to quickly access, but I also wanted you to see where you could find it online. Then the other piece that I wanted to share with you is this is our website. And if you are interested in getting some more information, you want to share with other people, we have information for families, for professionals, and about interveners. We also have our contact information here. And
Dan, this is Brandy.
Yes.
We're still just seeing the NCDB website. Oh, there we go. Now it switched.
Okay. How's that? What are you seeing now?
Yep, that's good. Now we see the Minnesota DeafBlind Project.
Okay, and I can't see the interpreter, so I'm waiting for the captions. Okay. All right, so the Minnesota DeafBlind Project website is here, and you can find a lot of different resources. This was the flyer for today. If you have someone on your team that is going to be needing to be trained as an intervener, if your school team just identified a student who needs intervener services, that information is found here on the flyer. The other thing I want to direct your attention to is deafblind resources for educators. I'm going to check and make sure that you are seeing that one. And on here, there's a lot of information for special educators. The one I want to point out there is just a landing spot where you can find clarification of the roles that, and a lot of you mentioned that you were interested in the comparison of interveners and paraprofessionals. It's a really great document. And then there's also the clarification of health staff, because sometimes there's some overlap and it's important for teams to understand the different roles. And that was a document that was published last fall. So going back to that, and also if you want, the documents are also found here under resources. So we have a lot of different places you can find information. If you're here and you're thinking, hey, we have a student who is deafblind, but does not yet have intervener services, this is a document that is great to guide that discussion. It's called Intervener Services Appropriate for Your Student with Deafblindness, an IEP Team Discussion Guide. That is from the National Center on Deafblindness. That document is also linked. You can also find it.
And this is Brandy again.
Yes.
Sorry, we're just only seeing the deafblind resources for special educators page. Seems like we're not following you if you're moving pages.
Okay. That's kind of annoying. I guess I have to share every single time I'm sharing. Okay, are you seeing the deafblind resources for special educators now?
Yes, that's what I see right now.
Okay, now I'm going back to the Minnesota DeafBlind Project website.
Nope, it did not change. Oh, yep. There's just a little delay maybe. Now
Okay.
I see the.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. What I was saying is that you can also find the resources here on this page as well, if you just want to go straight to the resources and don't want to work your way through the Google site. The Google site also has the same document, but there's more information in there. It also helps to get the whole team on the same page. And so I think that's the other reason I wanted to show you this, so you can share that with other team members. I'm going to stop showing that. I'm going back to my screen. Can you see where it says, do you want to learn more about deafblindness?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I mentioned this earlier when we first came together, but I just want to reinforce it. Some people said they were interested in learning about concept development. Those are some of that topic and other topics are in our cohorts that we have. These are facilitated cohorts. If you are a licensed educator, you are able to earn 24 CEUs after you complete the 4 modules in one cohort. Educational interpreters also can receive free RID CEUs. These cohorts are completely free to educators and interveners. If you are a new intervener and you're just starting to work with a deafblind student this year, you'll be in our weekend training and you'll be able to participate in these cohorts after you've completed the 6 weekend training. We've had people try to do both, and it is very overwhelming with the sheer volume of information. So we recommend after participating, after you've completed the training. The cohort will begin on Tuesday, September 17th. And we will be sending that information out to different listservs. In the follow-up email, I will also include a link to subscribe to the deafblind listserv. If you're not already on the blind, visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, developmental cognitive disabilities, or physical health disabilities listserv, so that's where we send our information. So people are aware of that. The other thing, if you have any questions at all, like I mentioned at the beginning, feel free to contact any one of us. We're a close team. So if you're not quite sure who you should email, we'll help you figure that out. You can email me at ann.mayes@brightworksmn.org. Brandy Sebera is the Family Engagement Coordinator. Mostly works with families. Brandy with a Y, Sebera, SEBERA @brightworksmn.org, or you can contact Deanna Rothbauer. If you have questions about the child count, or if you have just overview questions, you can contact Deanna. Deanna.Rothbauer, ROTHBAUER @brightworks.com. You will get a copy of both PowerPoints, this one and Carolyn's, later today or tomorrow. Then if you're interested and want to connect with us, we do have a Facebook account. We are also on Instagram, and then you can contact us on the website.